Welcome everybody. Before we get things really going this morning, I want to ask Karuk Councilmember Hockaday to come and get started with the invocation.
Mahihab, everybody. Good morning. I'm a little nervous. I haven't done it in a big crowd like this before. So bear with me. Can you all rise, please? Good morning, Creator. Thank you for everybody showing up and being here safely today. Creator, make sure everybody speaks well and everybody learns from each other so we can protect our salmon in our river. Creator, thank you for the beautiful weather we have outside today. Creator, thank you for the Mother Earth that you gave us to protect. Creator, thank you for the animals that we have to feed our families. Creator, thank you for the salmon that you have protected. Now it's our turn to protect the salmon that you gave for us, for our communities and our family. Yotwa.
Thank you, Councilmember. And then to welcome everybody here to this place, I want to ask Karuk Chairman Russell Buster Attebery to come up and give a couple of opening remarks and welcome everybody to Karuk country.
I prepared all these notes and now it's dark up here and I can't see. So I'll shoot from the hip. Ayuki Korda Mahit Yav Taniachicha Kas In Kum Ok. Hello and good morning. I am very happy that you are all here today. Welcome to Katrashiam, Wairika Wellness Center, and welcome to the Klamath Fish Passage Summit. If I had to attach a theme to this meeting, it would be working together to reach a common goal. And this is something that's started 20 plus years ago. When tribal members and indigenous people along Klamath River, Karuk, Yurok, Hupa, decided that it was time to do something about what they've seen, and that was a dying river, a river that was being filled with pollution, a river that was suffering from low flows and water quality, and so they took a trip to Scotland and to the corporate world on where the dam owners, and it was an effort to bring awareness to this dying river. And it's been a true fight for 20 years. Over the years, there's been countless studies and applied best practices on the river pollutants and the causes of that destroy river ecosystems. It's been done throughout our country, and the studies and the best practices that were done, we've transferred over to here, and we are here today in part because of all of you that have joined the team of Tribe in an effort to combine modern science with tribal ecological knowledge. The consultation process has been huge. It's an effort to include tribal traditional ecological knowledge, and that was what was left out of the equation for all those years. And certainly we want to include modern science. We advocate and we provide funds for our tribal students to go away to college and study and get higher education degrees. And so when they come home, we certainly want to pay attention to those. But we also are very pleased that through the consultation process that we are now paying attention to the tribal ecological knowledge that was passed down from generation to generation. It may not have been written in the books, but there's, it is, I'd say, undocumented facts that have worked for thousands of years. So we went through a process of trying to duplicate that, agencies trying to do it on their own, and I think we've come full circle, and now they are actually reaching out to the tribes and saying, how did this happen for thousands of years, and can we learn from you? And that's it's a great process. So happy to see all of you here, because it takes allies, it takes partners to get a project like this across the finish line. We have to combine our studies, combine modern science with tribal ecological knowledge. And I believe that the project has come full circle in a sense that from the time we first went back to Scotland to bring that awareness has trickled down to our children and to our students. And that is important, because that's what we're doing this for. We're doing it for the next generations. And I have a couple of quotes, and there's Yurok, Hupa, Karuk, tribal students who have participated in the annual salmon run. I believe this year was the 19th year, if I'm correct. And it's brought that awareness to our children where they really want to be involved. And I have a couple quotes from a Native News magazine when there's a recent article about the salmon run. And this is a run that starts at the mouth of the Klamath, and they meet tribal members, tribal students, tribal children along the way. They carry wooden fish to signify the salmon running up the river. And again, I say it's trickled down because now that awareness is with our children. So one of the quotes, Hupa tribal member, after the fish kill, we had to do something. To see our elders so sad was heartbreaking. So we decided to start the salmon run. Another student, Karuk tribal member, high school student. I was excited to join the salmon run for the first time. The salmon run is awesome. It was kind of tiring when running, but it was for our fish. That was the whole reason why I ran, for the fish. So that kind of awareness, I think, will carry on because it's our students that are speaking and it's our children that are seeing. So we want to make sure we embrace and help them along the way. And again, in closing, I would like to just say thank you, Yoto. Thank you in our language to all of you who have been our allies in this project, who have realized that the Indigenous people's culture along the river, along Klamath River, depend on the river. I saw firsthand growing up in Happy Camp, and my dad was more of a traditional fisherman up in Happy Camp. The salmon were starting to spawn, and so we fished for steelhead if we wanted salmon. We went to the coast or went downriver further. But again, I think that as I think back, I think the salmon were spawning kind of early, and it was because there were 400 miles of spawning grounds that were taken away. So it was a great way of life growing up as a kid there. I'm so excited to see that come back, because not only was it great to be able to fish all the time, it was even more satisfying to bring home fish to put on the dinner table and hear your folks say, give you thanks. It was your contribution to the family. To be able to go out and fish and bring the fish back, prepare them in fillets or smoked fish and give them to our aunties and our uncles or our elders who aren't able to go out and do that anymore. See the smiles on their faces? That gave those kids, myself when I was a kid, huge self-esteem. And our kids haven't seen that for years. And that's why I included these quotes from these kids. And so your consultation, your efforts to combine modern science with traditional tribal ecological knowledge and get this across the finish line is much appreciated. So thank you again, and have a great meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. Don't be shy. You can come up, sit up front. We won't call on you if you sit up front. Again, my name is Craig Tucker. I've been working as a consultant or an employee for Chairman Attebery and Councilman Hockaday and the Karuk tribe for a lot of years now, and I really do appreciate your comments. I think it does put the meeting on the right track. This is the kind of meeting 20 years ago we used to fantasize about having. Like, we used to have to talk about dam removal in whispers when the elevator doors closed so no one would laugh at us. And here we are on the brink of dam removal in the Klamath and starting to think about what comes next. And it's really, really exciting. But before we really get going, I did want to mention there's a few people that aren't here that I wish were here with us who helped us get to this place. And one is AWOC Troy Fletcher. Troy was Yurok tribal member, Yurok executive director. He played such a huge role in getting us here. He was a mentor to me and a lot of us that have worked on this. I want to mention Steve Thompson from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service played a huge role in leading this effort and getting it here. In the early days, one of the first people I talked to about this was Tim McKay at the North Coast Environmental Center. And then finally, Ronnie Pierce. I don't know how many of you guys remember Ronnie, but she worked for sometimes Karuk, sometimes Yurok, sometimes I couldn't tell who she worked for. But Ronnie has much to do with getting us to this place as anybody else. And I got a feeling that all four of them are, sitting next to a river and that big spawning ground in the sky, smiling, looking down on us, and cheering us on. So I just want to make sure we capture that. We have an amazing lineup of speakers this morning. I think you're all going to be impressed by what you learned from folks this morning and just how dynamic and impressive the folks working to remove dams in the Klamath River and restore this river really are. I want to thank Florine Super and her staff here at Kadashawn Wellness Center for help making the space happen. A big shout out to Dana Stoltzman and the team at the Salmonid Restoration Federation. Fantastic. In fact, I think you should give Dana a round of applause. I'm really impressed with her. Thank you, Dana. There's always that person that's the glue that makes things happen. So we're going to start by having Alicia Mars. She's the coordinator of the California Fish Passage Forum. She's also the coordinator of the Pacific Lamprey Conservation Initiative. And I told her this is one of the few rooms in the world where people will be really excited to know she's associated with lamprey. Alicia, come up, and she has a talk that gets this going, the opening remarks.
All right, great. Thanks, Craig, and thanks to everyone, especially Dana and everyone else for being here, and the Karuk for hosting us. On behalf of the forum, which I coordinate, we're really, really excited that this has come to fruition. This is something that we've been thinking about for many years. We had the opportunity, I'll talk about in a second, one of 20 regional fish habitat partnerships in the country. And in 2019, we had the opportunity to put in for some grant funding for communication and outreach activities on behalf of, for us, Fish Passage in California. And it was ultimately funded, not to the level that we had hoped, by the Association for Fish and Wildlife Agencies. It's a multi-state conservation grant. So that all came to fruition through NIFHAP. And of course, our vision of having a California Fish Passage Summit kind of went out the window because we wanted to do it in person because of COVID. So this has all been kind of kicking the can down the road as the forum really thought about how we wanted to use this money and what kind of summit we wanted to put on. Ultimately, it ended up being a bit of a blessing in disguise because the timing was really perfect for pulling an event here. And Bob Pagliuca was the chair of the forum when we put the proposal in and is still the chair of our governance committee and very, very active in the forum. And his leadership was really important in helping us identify this is where we wanted to do it. This is what our focus should be. Obviously, this is something near and dear to Bob's heart. But this was just a perfect opportunity for us. So we don't have a lot of capacity. I'm the only part-time staff on the forum. So we decided to utilize and tap into Dana and the team at SRF to really help us put this on. And this has then grown to what it is today. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that and also just a little bit more about the forum in case you're unfamiliar. So one of the ways that this, we started working on this before we could actually meet in person was back in 2020 for World Fish Migration Day, and that is something that we're also celebrating now, just 6 months later, so it's really in May, because we couldn't meet in person, we worked to pull together information from our partners on projects that have been going on in order to prepare the Klamath Basin for dam removal. So really highlighting the good work that's been going to enhance fish passage all through the last 20 years, as we've talked about, tapping into all the different partners, but walking folks through this virtual tour of the basin and some of the projects. This is by no means exhaustive, but I really encourage you to take a peek. And if you're having a stressful day, pull up the story map. The video on the front was shot by Damon Goodman, who was with Fish and Wildlife Service at the time. And it's a great, just kind of soothing video of watching some salmon and steelheads swim around. So this is what we did in the interim as we led up to getting to today. And ultimately, when we realized that we were actually going to be able to get to meet in person, the timing was really coming together with the dam removals. We started pulling together some key players that we really needed to help us get this off the ground. So I don't want to go any further without highlighting the folks that sat on our steering or planning committee for this event. Every single one of them was really crucial in getting you all here, getting us together, bringing together the field tours that we're going to go on that I know everybody is the most excited about. This lineup is great, but we all want to get out there. But it's really been a collaborative process since last spring, bringing all of us together. So huge thank you, and I think everybody should be here. So I'm going to take a quick step back here because I know we're running a little behind. I'm not going to go too deep into the forum, and I'm happy to talk about it offline, and there's members of the forum, past and present, here today, so they can also walk you through stuff. But essentially, we're a group of federal, state, nonprofit agencies all coming together with the shared mission of enhancing fish passage in California for anadromous species. So you can see in the green, that's our geographic scope region on the map, but the goal really is to find collaborative ways to tap into existing knowledge, funding, technical expertise, outreach capabilities, all those resources that nobody has enough of to really continue to enhance and highlight the importance of fish passage in California. So you can see here, these are the 10 current signatories to the forum. We're always open to more. So anybody here that's interested, we'd love to have you. And we can talk more about that. But again, this is a voluntary association. We're just basically saying that we're open and excited to work together on this. So you can see 3 of the folks that were part of the forum are here in this room. We've got Bob, Damon, and Anna Halligan with TU here in this picture, and this is one of our field tours. So we meet a few times a year in person around the state, and in addition to having our business meeting, we couple it with field tours, kind of like what we're doing today. So this was down in Southern California. So I mentioned NIFHAP briefly. Again, the forum is one of 20 regional fish habitat partnerships under NIFHAP. I put up here on the slide the 5 others that cover this region. So one, again, is the Pacific Lamprey Conservation Initiative, which is the other one I run. But also some of them are focused on species like PLCI, some or the Western Native Trout Initiative or Desert Fish Habitat Partnership, and others have more of a focus, say, on water body types. So PMEP is the Pacific Marine and Estuarine Partnership, or the reservoir partnerships. We all are working together collectively nationally. We each have little pots of funding that we can help put towards projects and other activities that I'm not going to dive into, but I'm happy to link you up with any of the other ones if you're interested. So a couple things that the forum's been working on. So in addition to our little pot of funding and pulling together meetings and groups like this, we have a really robust science and data committee, and we've really utilized that to tap into the existing technical knowledge within our forum agencies. So, you know, obviously we have designees to the forum steering committee, but then they bring in staff that may be working on fish passage, and we really think about how we can utilize their existing knowledge or maybe tap into funding opportunities to fund other things. So one of the things that we're working on a lot right now is updating the PAD, the Passage Assessment Database in California. So we're doing a comprehensive region by region update starting in Southern California up the coast. So we do some of it in-house and with the staff at PSMFC and TDF&W, but then we're tapping into local experts on the ground to really help us get a good idea of what the status of barriers are. And this tool feeds into so many other tools, and so many people are using that for decisions, especially as we're prioritizing barriers for removal with all this infrastructure money and other things that are coming through the door. So this is important information to have, and decisions will be, it's not sexy, but it's something that's really helpful for all these tools to inform. And so finally, just before I wrap it up, you know, I mentioned we have a little pot of money. It's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but often we can fund things that other pots can't. It's something that we've been able to utilize to get projects across the finish line. We can fund outreach, we can fund some things that may not always be useful. So our next RFP will be coming out at the end of this year. Obviously, reach out to me if you have questions. I know we've funded a variety of projects, including some in the Klamath. So you'll see I wanted to have, there's a really great, another plug for that story map. If you get in there, it highlights some of the projects that we worked on, or helped fund, I'm sorry, in the mid-Klamath. And there's a great little scroller that shows a before and after on that one. So I couldn't get the screenshot of that to go, so you got a teaser here. But yeah, so I think that's pretty much where we're gonna end up, but again, I wanna say thank you to all of you for being here, all the folks that helped bring this on, all the people that chipped in to add funding. I know many of your organizations, you know, as this event grew with enthusiasm, we needed additional funding to make sure it could happen, and we're really thankful for that. So I think that's all I got.
Thank you, Alicia, for all the hard work you're doing. Our next speaker is, I've worked with very closely for a lot of years, and I think he's a close colleague and a good friend, and I think I maybe met Frankie the first time in Scotland. And I can remember him kind of being a young fellow back then, and you know, filleting fish to cook in Scotland at this place called Calton Hill. And I think I knew then that he was destined to get involved in tribal politics and follow his dad's footsteps as a leader in the tribe, and he's become a very powerful voice in advocating for the Klamath and Klamath salmon and helping us get where we are with dam removal and other projects around the basin. So let's welcome Yurok Vice Chairman Frankie J. Myers.
Thank you, Craig, for that, much appreciated, and thank you for the reminder to give thanks to all who came before us, all the amazing people who worked to make this day happen, to make dam removal happen, who aren't with us. It's important for us as tribal people to always look back before we move forward. Chairman Attebery, thank you. Absolutely correct in that in order for us to move forward, the critical move is to take our traditional ecological knowledge and our modern science, combine them to move forward. Before there was modern science, there was just knowledge. It was what we had shared. And so I'll share a bit of a story from my family, from our village, one that has drove me and continues to remind me to continue to work. Heard it since I was a little kid. We say Nashi Khan time, long time ago. This story was handed down. My great aunt Queen lived at the village of Kinnick, the center of our world, where we came from, where Pulakakwerik and Wapekama were raised, and with Olgram and learned about all of the things of the world and how create the world. She said one night when she was asleep in her bed, she was awoken by Rawa, which is a spirit that lives in the river, and he had woken her up and said, "Hey, I need to show you something." And she knew immediately who it was, and that she needed to wake up and follow him, and so she did, and they went down to a rock down by the mouth of Tula Creek, and they sat on the rock there. That was a prayer site, and he said, "Look, Cassine, look, watch." She turned back to the river, and she could see the entire river, from the headwaters all the way to the ocean. She could see into the water. She could see the salmon and the sturgeon, the lamprey, and it was as if she was watching decades go by in seconds. And she could see the runs going up, and she could see them coming back. She could see them spawning. She could see the juveniles going out, and she was overjoyed and said, "Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to see this beautiful thing that you're showing me here." And he said, "No, that's not what I'm showing you. Watch." So she turned back again, and she watched, and as she was watching, over the time, she could see that there was less fish returning, that there was less sturgeon returning, less salmon returning, until eventually, as she was watching, there was nothing left in the river. And she was heartbroken. She was tears. She had asked Rawa what she had done to deserve to see such an atrocity, what she had done wrong, and she had apologized and said, "No, you've done nothing wrong. But I needed for you to see this. Because if there ever comes a day when there's no more salmon in the river, there's no more fish in the river, there'll be no more need for Yurok people here on earth. There'll be no more need for people." As a young man hearing that story, I heard it as just that, a story. In 2002, as I was working for the fisheries program and witnessing the 2002 fish kill unfolding before me and seeing 100,000 dead fish along the banks of the river, from where we practice our world renewal ceremony all the way to the mouth. That story changed because it was possible. It could happen. And if something didn't change, it was going to happen. I look now and I think it's absolutely critical that we see ourselves as being a part of the environment around us. That we're a part of the river, we're part of the mountains, because we're all connected. It's why we do this work. I say we work for dam removal, we work for salmon restoration for selfish reasons. It's because I want to survive. I want my kids to continue to thrive. I want my people to survive. And the story that's been handed down is without the species in the river, That's not possible. We look to the next 20 years as we look back from the last 20 years. Dam removal is absolutely critical and key to restoring the Klamath Basin. We knew that. But we also knew that wasn't the only thing. We couldn't just stop at dam removal. If I wanted to ensure my people's survival, if I wanted to ensure our children and our grandchildren continue to be here, that dam removal needed to only be a step, a huge step, but only a step. We've had 100 years of extractive, destructive industry in this basin. We've had 100 years of looking at this basin and our environment as being separate from us. If we know anything in our hearts as Indigenous people, it's balance. It's our purpose here on earth. It's why we're all here. And some cultures see that, others don't. But humans have a purpose here on earth. Our purpose, our peace in the environment, is to create the balance around us. Is to create the balance in the environment. And we push back on the idea that a wilderness ever existed. And to be clear, in this continent, on this continent, there was not a square foot of land that wasn't managed. The idea of Western wilderness did not exist. It's a fallacy. People have always managed this land. We've always worked to ensure fish passage. We've always worked to ensure that our species had good habitat. As we move forward, as we collaborate and we bring people together, you are a part of a management structure that we have been doing since time immemorial, and we thank you for it. But there's more to be done, and we need to continue to push forward, because working towards balance doesn't stop. There is no point where you sit down and say you're done. It's never been true. It will never be true. We simply see ourselves as a link in a chain of balance and restoration that goes back to the beginning of time. I hope we continue this conversation. I hope we continue that thought process. I hope we all take it in our hearts that we are one piece of continuing restoration, of continuing balance, and this is why we're supposed to be here. This is why humanity is supposed to be here. Welcome. Thank you.
Dana only gave me signs that says you have 5 minutes left, but I didn't have one to give you extra 5 minutes, or I think I ought to use that one, Vice Chairman. Thank you for that, and I think it really does help those of us who are, a lot of non-natives working on Klamath, and I think those kinds of stories really help ground us and help us understand why we're here working in this alongside our native colleagues in these battles. Which brings me to my next speaker, who's also a good friend of mine that I've known for 20 years. All these people I've known for decades. And Mike Belchek and I are actually the founding members of a secret organization. It's the White Guys Working in Indian Country Support Group. And he and I have been the founding members. We've been the founding members of that organization. If you want to join, let me know. I'll give you a membership form later. But Mike, I love working with Mike. He's one of those guys. I love directing news reporters and people to Mike because he's one of those people that can take these complicated, whether it's hydrology or fish biology or whatever it is and really put it in the layman's terms that everybody can understand and tell that story. And I really appreciate that about Mike. So Mike Belchek, come on up. He's a senior water policy analyst for the Yurok tribe. He's on the board of the Salmonid Restoration Federation. He's getting involved in removing dams in other places. He's on the board of the Friends of the Eel River, and he's going to share with us the story, I think, of how we got to here. Thank you, man.
Thanks. How do I find my presentation here? So the title of my talk is Honoring Those Who Helped Us Along the Way. And so Craig and Vice Chairman already talked about that a little bit, stole some of my talk, but I think it's really appropriate. And so as you can see from the first picture here, I think what I want to do is tell the story of how we got to here and some of the chapters that went along the way, because we're standing on the precipice. We're not quite at the finish line, but we're like at the 5-yard line. We just need to not fumble. We need to not spike the ball early. We're right there. So I did want to talk a little bit about the chapters of dam removal, and then as I do, I want to talk a little bit about some of the people that made a difference there. And you can see from the very opening picture here, I think the first people I want to acknowledge are the tribal members from all the tribes around the basin, and even those from outside the basin, who took the time, did direct action. A lot of us, like myself, are getting paid to do a lot of this stuff. A lot of them were not. They couldn't afford it, but they went to Omaha anyway. They went to Sacramento, they went to Portland, and they went to Scotland, and they made a difference. I'm telling you, they made a difference. So the first, hang on, I'm trying to get to presentation mode here so I can actually see my notes here. The first part of dam removal, I don't have a mouse here. Okay, all right, well, I'm just gonna go here. The first part of dam removal was the early FERC days. So in around 2000, Pacificor rolled into town saying they were gonna be our new best friends, and we were gonna go through the FERC relicensing. And it was right away when the tribes started talking about dam removal. And for that, I really need to give credit to Ronnie Pierce. She worked for Karuk tribe, and she was the one, when I expressed doubt and other people said that, I don't know if we're gonna be able to get these dams out. She was saying, no, we are gonna get these dams out, and here's how we're gonna do it. So a lot of the early days in the FERC were spent developing technical information, doing deep dive into FERC policy, and trying to build the record so that the rest of the proceeding would tilt its way towards dam removal, or that if we end up negotiating with the company, that we would have strong negotiating position. So a lot of that involved early media and direct action. And Craig Tucker gets a lot of credit for that, but there was a big team of people. So I remember it was in Wairika at a hotel room after another long FERC meeting with the company when we came up with the idea to go to Scotland. We were power mapping the decision-making structure and realized that Pacificor was owned by Scottish Power, and that it would be pretty incredible if we could go there. Craig really helped raise a lot of money for that. I think we sent about 25, 30 people there. And yeah, we did have a salmon cook on top of Calton Hill, and that was quite a story. Frankie and I were charged with running the logistics for that. We got to Calton Hill, there was no sand. We didn't have any firewood. We didn't have any fish. We didn't have anything. And this is the day before the cook, and it all happened. We went to the fishmonger and asked for a dozen wild Atlantic salmon, and the guy just looked at us like we were crazy. And I put down a government credit card. I think I paid $1,400 for 9 salmon. And we had already decided no wild fish, no cook. We were not going to use farm salmon, and we did find wild fish somehow. Not sure the province of those. In the end, FERC did issue an EIS. It did not include dam removal. However, it did analyze dam removal. That was a huge deal. Usually in FERC, it's we consider dam removal, but immediately dismissed it. We didn't even analyze it. That's generally where dam removal falls in FERC EISs for relicensing. But we actually convinced them to do that. And thanks to large part to Ronnie Pierce's research and their dam removal policy and the way that we built the record. Pacific Corps challenged the findings in that FERC hearing, even though it didn't require dam removal, and that hearing did not go well for them. We won on every count. Basically, their argument was we should not be required to put in fish ladders because all the fish would die anyway, so it's pointless. Why should we? So we had to argue that fish passage would be successful. It sounds a little backwards. It seems like you would get dam removal if you argued that fish passage could not work, but in fact, that wasn't the way it went. There's lots of stories behind that, but that helped set the stage for negotiations. So around 2008, we began negotiations. You should understand that I think it was 5 straight years Pacific Corps would not even meet with the Yurok tribe. And they finally agreed to meet with us in Arcata. I was on the road. I was in the car with AWOC Howard McConnell, chairman, and AWOC Troy Fletcher. And Howard said, "How much do you think dam removal will be?" And I said, "Well, current estimates are around $95 million. And he was like, "Oh, shoot, we'll get that money." Like, I was just thinking, well, what an obstacle. We're never going to get that kind of money. And he was like, "Oh, if that's fine. We'll get that. We're going to get these dams out." So this is the kind of determination and the kind of people that we had with us. We reached a settlement in 2010. It was a companion agreement with the KBRA. The original KHSA called for a congressional end run around FERC to avoid some of the problems and delays that we actually did see come true. There was also a widespread lack of trust that FERC would kind of mess with things. However, I think, it's all settled history now about exactly what happened with the KBRA, the KHSA. They did not pass, and in 2015, late 2015, 2016, just kind of pulled the plug on that effort. But then there was more negotiations to amend the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement and re-sign it. So in April 2016, in Requa, on a fine 90-degree April day, we had a signing ceremony down at the mouth of the river, and that began the latest chapter in the dam removal effort. KRRC, Klamath River Renewal Corporation, was formed. Their first really smart move was hiring Mark Branson, who's going to come on next and bring you up to more speed right here. Key contractors are identified, construction plans refined, key FERC documents filed. I think what I want to get the idea that there was just a lot of work that happened right there, and KRRC, its board of directors, our supporting partners, were all part of that. I also want to say, give a special shout out to the role that the nonprofits and the NGOs played in helping us here. Especially early on, they were really crucial in providing funding support, but also like in the negotiations on the original KHSA, Chuck Bonham back then worked for Trout Unlimited. Chuck Bonham, Richard Roos Collins, and our outside counsel, Scott Williams, would get together after all-day meeting, and they go sit in the hotel room and turn that into legal language, draft language, red line language that everyone could look at the next day. And I don't think we could have done the deal without them. So I just wanted to give a special tip of the hat to all of our NGO partners. NEC was important earlier. Trout Unlimited was really important. Cal Trout was really important. And American Rivers was also really important in providing some early estimates of dam removal costs and some visioning for that. We did complete more key milestones. So at this point, after the KHSA was signed, it's all about checking milestones and boxes, like just methodically going through. I think there's 46 different management plans that KRC finished, the CEQA document, and I think the sense I'm trying to give you here is that it was a long journey and everybody played a role, whether it was KRC, whether it was the guiding force and principles of the tribes and the TEK, and my employer, the Yurok tribe, which I know that there was about 3 or 4 times that AWOC Troy flat out rescued this deal from being dead, and just would not let it die just by force of will. I want to just close with a picture of Ronnie Pierce here. This is the relicensing application for Pacificor. This is, it's somewhere in the early 2000s, I think. So this is the application that FERC turned in. We didn't really have like online sites where you could just download stuff. So I got this in the mail too. They mailed it in a series of boxes. And this is like Appendix A, B, C, D. And I think Ronnie's quote on here is, I read this entire relicensing application and I can't even tell that salmon live in the Klamath River from this. That was one of her quotes. And I also want to finish with a picture of Troy Fletcher, who was really one of the guiding forces. He was a master strategist. He was absolutely amazing. Photographic memory. He would sit at the table with nothing in front of him and say, well, on page 43, paragraph 2, and then do a quote, and you'd see people opening it there, and it would be right there. He could just remember chapter and verse of everything he read, like a literal photographic memory, but also just thinking like 2-3 moves ahead, and he was an amazing people person. That's what I really loved about Troy. He was one of my best friends. I will never, ever stop missing him. And I often think about, as we're closing in on the final chapter, you know, getting near the finish line, and we have any difficulties, I always think like, well, what would Troy be doing? And I know what he'd be doing right now. He'd be thinking, okay, what are we going to do after dam removal? That's a step in the right direction, but how are we going to do this? I don't have pictures of, but I do also want to acknowledge Steve Thompson and Tim McKay. They both played absolutely critical roles. Steve Thompson was a federal leader, really important in getting diverse groups together. And Tim McKay was just a no-compromise, staunch tribal and environmental supporter, a real bridge between environmental groups and tribes. I think we could really use another Tim McKay at any point here. And then there are so many. I know if I forgot to mention anybody, it's just because of my own unique point of view and my own faulty memory. So I apologize. We've come a long way, and here to help us understand what we have left here and some of these last steps is the next. And Craig, you better introduce him better than me, but Mark Branson's going to come next.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. I really do appreciate kind of telling that history of how we got here. It was fantastic. And one of the big moves, once we did get an agreement, we did follow this model of creating a nonprofit organization that could take the dams, oversee the removal of the dams, manage the liabilities, all this sort of stuff. We're really going to have to find somebody who's pretty sharp to run this organization, who's got impeccable organizational skills, who's has experience working with large bureaucracies, who's got outstanding people skills. We'll never find a guy like that. But we did. We found Mark Branson. He is the, not executive director, but the CEO of the Klamath River Renewal Corporation. He's done an amazing job. We're really lucky that we have found him and that he has not ran for the basin screaming, which I thought could happen also. So, Mark, we look forward to hearing the latest update on Klamath dam removal. Do you need a PowerPoint?
No,
okay.
I'm just going to talk through some notes, Craig. Thank you. Well, good morning, all you good people. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you to Chairman Attebery and Vice Chair Myers and all the tribal members who are here today. The Renewal Corporation never misses an opportunity to acknowledge that we literally are standing on your shoulders. And we've been given the responsibility and the honor of trying to help get this project across this finish line by working through some of the logistics. Thanks to Bob and Dana for the invitation to be here this morning. I'd also like to acknowledge that a couple of my board members are here, Wendy George and Brian Johnson, and you all know them well, and have a deep appreciation for the role that they have played in getting us where we are. Their guidance, their willingness to field calls from me and my staff at any time of the day or night, day of the week, means a lot. That guidance has been invaluable to us. So, well, where are we? We're on the cusp. We've never had more momentum or more of a sense of inevitability that those dams are going to come down than we enjoy right here, right now, today. In fact, We're keeping fingers crossed. If Diane Bard lets out a big woot at some point during the talk, you'll know that we have appeared on FERC's Sunshine Notice, which is the public meeting notice they issue a week ahead of a commission meeting. We're anticipating that FERC may act on our surrender application as early as next week at the commission meeting on the 20th. And we may see that on the Sunshine Notice as early as this morning. So we're anxiously awaiting that. What is surrender? Surrender is basically the legal and administrative step that FERC will take to say, yes, the dam decommissioning plans, all the management plans that Craig mentioned, look good. The Renewal Corporation and its partners have demonstrated the capacity and the wherewithal to execute this project according to the things that they've laid out for us. And we hereby approve the surrender of the operating license for the hydroelectric project. Go forward. We're going to keep a close eye on you. We're going to watch you. You're going to report on the things that you're doing. But we believe that you've demonstrated an ability to do this. When we do receive a surrender order, if that's on the 20th of October or subsequent, we will have 30 days to evaluate that surrender order and determine that there's nothing outside the boundaries of a normal surrender order, anything that would give us any reservations about our capacity and our wherewithal to live up to the terms and conditions therein. That 30-day clock starts right away. What we would do then is basically confer with the principals. That's the funding parties, the tribes, the other partners to the amended Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, and basically ask for the green light go decision from that group. If everything looks within the boundaries, we agree that we can implement all of the agreements that we've reached and have a sense that we've got the money, we've got everything that we need to proceed, then we will proceed to accept the transfer order. And you don't really accept the surrender. FERC is basically saying, if you accept the transfer order, these are the terms and conditions of surrender. You're basically agreeing to those. So we'll confer with the principal parties to get the green light go decision and then move forward. And I'll talk a little bit about the schedule for all of those things in just a moment. But where are we then on some of the other regulatory issues? So as you all know, FERC issued the final environmental impact statement on August 26th, a month ahead of their published schedule, which really seemed to create some good momentum. Part of what leads us to believe that they could act on surrender as early as next week is the fact that they got that final EIS out, completed all of the remaining environmental review, and continue to build on some momentum there. Yesterday morning, FERC issued a revised programmatic agreement under National Historic Preservation Act. This has been one of the things that FERC has said they wanted to get completed before issuing the surrender order. Yesterday's letter to the Advisory Council on Historic Properties, the California State Historical Preservation Officer, and their counterpart in Oregon basically said FERC has accepted all of the comments that the parties have made on the latest version of the programmatic agreement and the Historic Properties Management Plan. Please execute the programmatic agreement. So we've seen several signatures on that agreement come in. We're awaiting signatures from the California SHPO, the Oregon SHPO, and the Advisory Council on Historic Properties, and we're hopeful that we will see those today, perhaps in advance of the release of the Sunshine Notice. Let me just mention, of course, that the importance of the Historical Properties Management Plan, all of the related agreements and the programmatic agreement basically governs how the Renewal Corporation and our prospective co-licensees will be responsible for the mitigations and protections of tribal cultural resources and particular elements of the built environment. Part of what we will be doing is field studies and additional work to determine eligibility for some of those tribal cultural resources and components of the built environment to be listed on the Register of Historic Places. And again, we're making some good progress on ensuring those mitigations are in place and those protections will be afforded to those eligible properties. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality several weeks ago issued their updated Clean Water Act Section 401 water quality certification, and we are anxiously awaiting the counterpart from the California Water Resources Control Board and the Section 404 permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers has committed to issuing that permit no later than November 1st, and we think they have everything to be able to do that. Diane Barr and her amazing staff from Camas have just this week earlier filed with the Water Board a document that allows the Water Board to crosswalk all of the final EIS staff modifications and all of the mandatory conditions and the updates in our mini management plans so that the Water Board can easily see the proposed changes to the language that we're making and allow them to make further advancements on the 401. So the 401 from California and the 404 remain kind of the last big water quality and regulatory hurdles that we will get across that will be necessary before we can proceed. We do have to chase down a few county and local permits. We have MOUs in place with both Klamath County, Oregon, and Siskiyou County, California, laying out the work that we will do to make improvements to road and other transportation infrastructure. We will pursue with the county ministerial permits. We will not pursue any permits with the county that require CEQA. So these would be things like building permits, plumbing, electrical, things like that that are necessary primarily for the construction of the Fall Creek Hatchery. Construction of the Fall Creek Hatchery is an obligation of Pacific Corp and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, but because we are a prospective co-licensee, the permitting requirement for that falls to the Renewal Corporation. So that's kind of an overview of where we are on the regulatory front. We are getting very close to knocking out the last of the many permits. On the administrative and legal front, we are in the process of getting, and will have by early next week, agreement on over 75 implementing agreements and closing conditions documents that will govern how the co-licensees will cooperate and collaborate for purposes of implementing the orders and the permits. So these include things like the operation and maintenance agreement that we have with Pacific Corp to continue to operate the dams, the land transfer agreement, the funding agreement with the co-licensees, and so on and so forth. Following on that, and an opportunity to look at all the permit terms and conditions, we will execute guaranteed maximum price contract amendments with our prime contractors. So Kiewit on the infrastructure side, and Rez, who is well represented in the audience today, our restoration contractor and a tremendous partner. And we really thank Rez for all the good work they're doing. We will execute those contract amendments that will basically then lock in the scope and the pricing for the work that we will be doing over the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And then what? At long last, people, we turn our attention to construction. So we expect to give notice to proceed to Kiewit at the earliest possible time, hopefully no later than the end of this calendar year, which will allow Kiewit then to mobilize in the field at the earliest possible time. As soon as the weather cooperates, I would expect field mobilization to come February, March of 2023. And we get started. What do we get started on? We've got 8 to 9 months of what I refer to as enabling construction projects just to get us ready for the reservoir drawdown and dam removal. The work groups that sort of put together the thinking on when to do the drawdown of the reservoir gave us a window between early January and mid-March to draw the reservoirs down during the least biologically active period of the year. A period during which we are going to have significant impacts on the river. High turbidity, low DO, all the things you don't want, but we need to do, and we're going to do it in that fixed window to minimize impacts and get that sediment moved through the system as early as possible so that we can then get started. So those enabling construction projects, roads and bridges, we've got City of Wairika water line, we've got to relocate, we've got to move operations from Fall Creek Hatchery, from Iron Gate Hatchery over to the Fall Creek Hatchery, and we've got to get that ready before we hit the water supply level at Iron Gate Hatchery. Copco number 2 dam, the little diversion dam that sits between Copco 1 and Iron Gate, coming out in the summer of next year. We're going to create a dry condition, and Kiewit will be working down in the riverbed at the base of Copco 1 and doing work on the other dams. We'll create that dry condition. We'll get in there probably in July of 2023 and knock Copco number 2 out, create a free-flowing river condition then between Copco 1 and Iron Gate for the first time in almost forever. It's amazing. Drawdown. Starting in January of 2024 through the middle of March or whatever, we'll have a little pause if we need it in the mid-March, April timeframe, which is the typical out-migration for coho juveniles. If we still have water in the reservoirs and sediment to mobilize and flush, we'll take it up again in the May timeframe and use some of May and a little of June if necessary. Immediately thereafter, Kiewit will get started with the removal of Boyle, Copco 1, and Iron Gate Dam. So that is slated for probably the July through the November of 2024 timeframe. And then RES will come in virtually immediately. We'll get busy with some stabilization, some erosion and sediment control. The full-blown restoration work will then get started in earnest in 2025. And depending on the terms and conditions of permits, then we'll have an establishment period in the early few years, and then the monitoring and compliance work that will extend out probably, I'm guessing it'll be 5 to 8 years. That will be spelled out in the surrender order and the remaining permits that we expect to see forthcoming in the next couple of weeks. And then the dams are out. And again, it's just an amazing, amazing thing to be standing here, to be talking about being on this threshold. You all have been approaching fearlessly any number of challenges and thresholds, and you've found your way across those. And again, the Renewal Corporation is just honored to be a small part of that and play the role that we're playing to help get this thing across the finish line. I look forward to seeing many of you up at the dams today and tomorrow, and welcome your comments, your thoughts, and any questions you might have. Craig, thank you very much for the opportunity.
That was great. Thanks, Mark, for bringing that story to us and helping us figure out where we go from here and navigating that alphabet soup of agencies and regulatory processes. While Bob's getting his PowerPoint up, there are some cameras in the space. We have folks from Oregon Public Broadcasting here. We have folks from the local Siskiyou Media. And we have the official documentary film team for Klamath Dam Removal, Swiftwater Films, here taking footage. So don't say anything that you wouldn't want your mom or your kids to see you saying on television. I should have mentioned that earlier, probably. So we've welcomed everybody here. We've talked a little bit about the history of the effort to get to this place. We talked a little bit about these final regulatory steps. We're finally getting to this moment where we're going to start looking forward and pivoting to what comes next. So I'll introduce Bob Pagliuco. He's a neighbor of mine over in McKinleyville, California. He is the Marine Habitat Resource Specialist. He is the slayer of fish and the cooker of hot sauce. Bob, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you for bringing up what's next, because that's something that me and my team have been working on for the last 3 years and thinking about for a while now. I might just rename the presentation, What's Next? This is the Klamath Reservoir Reach Restoration Prioritization Plan, and it takes a look at what we need to do next from Iron Gate to Link River. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the co-authors, Chris O'Keefe and Brett Holycross from Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, and then also Nell Scott and Tommy Cianciolo from Trout Unlimited. How about this? What's the idea? Good. We're off to a good start. There we go. So, working in the basin for many years, I noticed, there's a lot of different basin-specific restoration plans out there. You have one down there in the Scott River that Betsy and her team worked on, identifying some restoration projects and ideas in the Scott River and the west side tributaries. The Mid-Klamath Watershed Council and the Karuk and others have been very busy putting together their plans in the Mid-Klamath area, mine tailing remediation plan, and then that spreadsheet that no one can read is the Mid-Klamath Canada Actions Table. The folks in the Salmon River put together their own Canada Action Tables to identify and prioritize restoration projects. We have some folks in the Upper Basin that put together the Klamath River Watershed Action Plan up there. And then to kind of tie it all together at a much higher level, we have the Klamath Integrative Fisheries Restoration and Monitoring Plan, also known as the IFRMP. But one thing we noticed, I've been on a lot of field tours up here and then working through that IFRMP process, noticed that there's, this big gap in the center there in the reservoir reach. There wasn't a lot of listed species in that area. There wasn't a lot of money coming to that. So Max Ramos did a little bit of work, I think 2 years ago on that, but he just kind of scratched the surface and we really wanted to kind of take it to the next level. So I convinced my leadership to give me a bunch of money and invest some money above Attebery, which they have never done before. So I was pretty stoked that they did that. We built a partnership with Pacific States and Trout Unlimited. And then we essentially developed a work plan and we vetted our methods and our protocols with a science panel to get buy-in and sign off from folks. We went ahead and collected the data and then developed another technical advisory committee to get some buy-in to prioritize these projects we identified, to score them, and then come up with a list of projects. So the geographic scope, the area in blue over there is where we did the majority of our habitat work. And then the area in red is where we did our diversion and flow restoration work. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. So the diversion assessment, we can spend all of our time and money doing diversion assessments. With our limited time and money, we decided to focus just on locations. Where are these diversions in the landscape? What are the volumes? Are they screened? Are there barriers associated with them? We did a temperature assessment looking for the cold water refugia that's so very important for these fish as they migrate both up and downstream. We were looking for the Tom Martin creeks. For those of you that don't know about Tom Martin Creek, it's a very small tributary, maybe 200 meters of anadromous habitat, right downstream of the Scott River. If you drove over it, you'd think, oh, that means nothing for fish, but it creates this huge cold water plume in a backwater in the Klamath River, and then also has some habitat features in there as well. And it's been known to hold thousands of fish. So we wanted to not only focus on like the big tributaries that we saw within this reservoir reach, but also look for those tiny hidden gems that are going to be really important for fish as they move upstream and downstream. And then of course, we wanted to collect some habitat assessment data to help kind of identify what those limiting factors are, those stresses and threats in all these different tributaries. Of course, when we had boots on the ground, we wanted to identify, opportunities for restoration, get some buy-in from the technical advisory committee so we're not working in a vacuum and we get good ideas. And then we're working on a fauna report. So we kind of started off with developing our sampling space as far as where we think these fish are going to be within the reservoir reach. And we worked with Brett Holycross, and as Alicia mentioned earlier, that tool that we use, Fish Pass, he made this baseline layer for the entire state of California for that. So he kind of came up into Oregon and helped with this project and, talked to local experts and looked for, known fish barriers, fish observations, and then used the hydrography as far as like slope and valley width, a lot of the things that you would use to make intrinsic potential models. So that's kind of what we used for our boots on the ground. But we know that there's a lot of things that are above anadromy that influence habitat and habitat conditions downstream. So we didn't have the time or money to put boots on the ground everywhere. This is a huge area. So what we did was we used Google Earth imagery and we created a mapping tool to point out things that could influence habitat conditions like cattle, crossings, riparian vegetation, looking for other diversions or cold water springs, and any other type of channel manipulations that we could find, so we can really kind of hone in on these stresses and threats within the area. So we wanted to find those Tom Martins, the cold water, right? These fish need patchworks of diverse habitat across the landscapes, and we wanted to find those cold water areas. There's been a lot of temperature monitoring on some of these major trips, like Spencer Creek and Jenny Creek and Fall Creek, so we didn't really want to spend a lot of our effort there because we already had data. We wanted to find those hidden gems. So we put 20 thermistors out there at different locations based on some analysis we did on where we thought there would be some cold water. And then we tried to fly a drone to get a handle on the J.C. Boyle Springs, but the parts were made in China and Pacificor. It didn't work out for that. So we ended up working with Pacificor and coming up with some funding to actually fly a helicopter. And we worked with ENS Environmental and NV5 Geospatial to fly that reach in 2021. And really cool information came out of that. We found 119 significant thermal features. And you can see the temperatures there. They range from 11 to 15 degrees, so nice cold water popping out of there. And just last month, Mike Dees went down there and he took some flow measurements in those canyons. He was only able to do 3 cross sections because it's extremely treacherous and dangerous down there. But he found 234 CFS of cold water coming out of those springs. And if you could see that, that graphic on the left, right between site A1 or 1A and site 2, there's 181 CFS coming out of that area. So this is going to be a really important part for holding habitat for fish and habitat for both upstream and downstream salmonids. So the habitat surveys, we looked at stream flow, spawning gravel, what the riparian condition were, large woody debris, what the temperatures were. We dove every one of these reaches to look at the distribution and the presence of salmonids, of course, looking for restoration opportunities. Are there cattle in the creek here? Is there a barrier? And we kind of summarize these things at the reach level. And if you include the Klamath River main stem, which we really didn't do boots on the ground, we kind of did that aerial survey to identify opportunities there. There's about 101 miles of habitat, including the main stem Klamath throughout that reach. One other really cool thing we did, we were trying to pick our brains, figure out like how can we figure out floodplain connectivity and potential for off-channel habitats. And we worked with Brian Kluwer and Brett Holycross and Paul Powers to develop a geomorphic grade line analysis. And we came up with these great polygons in the very rare flat alluvial valleys that are within this reach. There's only a few. There's quite a few on Spencer. The majority of Spencer is these broad flat alluvial valleys. And if you look at the color map over here on Spencer Creek on the right, the greens, the light and dark greens means you only need a little bit of work to bring up that channel to reconnect those floodplains. You might need a BDA or a series of log jams to really get that floodplain connectivity going. Whereas that big long polygon on Shovel Creek, it's got a lot of red around it. That means it's pretty incised and 6 to 12 feet disconnected from its floodplain. And then we found 2 other polygons that we could potentially restore on Jenny Creek. But this is a really great exercise, and it's a good first step on potentially moving the ball forward on that. So all in all, we ended up identifying 82 projects, habitat restoration projects, and then developed these prioritization criteria. We vetted the prioritization criteria with the TAC, and we just came up with 4 simple scoring criteria. We were kind of thinking about like adding a whole bunch and making it complex, but at the end of the day, it really didn't separate these projects. The more criterion we added, so we kept it to: does the project address a key limiting factor? What's the magnitude of the benefit for fish? How many salmonids and life stages will the project benefit? And then what are the other species benefits for ecosystem needs as well? So we ran that through the grinder and came up with 82 projects. I'm not going to get into this, but I just wanted to flash this up on the screen. These are our top 10 projects. And the way we kind of binned them was, you know, project number 1 is not necessarily more important than project number 11, but we have a whole series of higher priority projects, a series of medium priority projects, and then kind of the lower ones that we get to, you know, after we kind of dealt with some of the higher priority projects. So what do we do for flow? We looked at all these primary and secondary tributaries that are listed up here, and we used two criterion for that, which is diversion rate and then also the water right priority date as well. And that would kind of break them into a high or medium and low priority category. 106 kind of fell out into the lower priority areas, 15 medium, and then 23 high. You can see a lot of those are, you know, on Jenny Creek, and then also the main stem Klamath River. There's a lot of Pacific Core diversions there that need to get, that could get improved to get more flow in the river. So all in all, those red dots are the higher priority projects, and then the yellow ones are the medium priority projects. And all of this stuff is in the plan we're writing. I'm just trying to give you folks a little snapshot of what's coming in November, hopefully, if we end up finishing this plan on time. So we looked at fish screening, and our criteria that we used to evaluate that was diversion size, the benefit to salmonids, and then also the impact to fish. The impact to fish we used, it was pretty subjective. We got some experts in the room, and we weighted it heavily, 60%, and I think that really helped kind of separate the dogs from the diamonds when we were looking at that. So here's the screening results, and what's next? I guess the answer is we've got 70 unscreened diversions within the reservoir reach that we need to deal with. And 50 of those are upstream of Keno Dam and what we call the Keno Impoundment Reach. So we have a lot of work to do, especially on the screening front. And this is just a map showing downstream of Keno where these things are. We got 20 unscreened and 3 screened. You can see a bunch over there on Spencer Creek, those ones on the main stem Klamath, some up on Shovel, and then down there on Jenny as well. And then this is the 55 diversions that are located all with that Keno Impoundment Reach, of which only 5 are screened. So we got to roll up our sleeves there. I did want to give you a little snapshot of some of the reach level habitat work that we did, and we looked at large weed debris and then spawning gravel along with riparian canopy cover as well. And Long Prairie Creek and Spencer Creek had the majority of the large weed debris. And then if you're looking at gravel, we had Camp Creek, and then Spencer Creek had the majority of the spawning gravel. There's one thing I learned though, is you can estimate where these fish are going to spawn based on, you know, these scientific studies, but they're going to really show us where the spawning grounds are, hopefully in a couple years. The canopy cover there, we analyzed the riparian cover there as well, and the highest was on Long Prairie Creek and some of the other smaller tribs up on Shovel, like Grouse Springs Creek. But there's definitely a lot of need for riparian restoration and fencing out cattle in a lot of those areas up there. So I don't expect you to read this, but I did want to tell you how we're kind of laying out our plan. It's kind of like we have these tributary summaries that are like little book reports on every single one of these tribs, where we have maps and we look at the barriers, we look at the water temperatures, we look at the stream flows and kind of describe that. And it's not only what we found, we did an extensive literature review of all the work that has been done in the past in these and kind of summarized them as well. So you have kind of like the latest and greatest information of all these little tributaries, so a practitioner or a funder can pick this up and just really get a good understanding of what's happening here. We looked at salmonid presence, we described the habitat. There's quite a few photos in here looking at habitat conditions. This is where we identified the stresses and the threats. We made restoration recommendations, and then we kind of identified specific restoration projects. So outcomes so far, as I mentioned before, we had that Klamath thermal infrared flight, which is really awesome. We've got a working group that is currently working on collecting those flows, and then also looking at areas in which we can potentially enhance or protect even further. I ran into Todd McDonald from E&S Environmental last night at Strings, and he was just getting back from a field visit, so that work is actively happening as we speak. Also, we've been having some conversations with Green Diamond. Green Diamond owns the majority of Spencer Creek, it's the gem of this area. That's where we expect the majority of our coho to go. And they were super stoked. I gave them a presentation of the 25 projects we found on their property, and we had some field visits, and they really want to roll up their sleeves and start working on some of the restoration there. So we're starting those conversations. And then just yesterday, we had a pretty long meeting about what are we going to do with these diversions, especially in the Keno Reach. So conversations are happening, subgroups are being formed, and we're thinking about what's next and how we're going to move forward on that. So where are we at with the plan? We're still incorporating the comments from the TAC, and then we can start rolling up our sleeves and working on these habitat flow and screening projects as well. We're going to continue to collect temperature data until 2023. We're still going to try to limit in Pacific states on that so we can get some additional data, and then do outreach and work with stakeholders to try to get the word out and help figure out what's next.
Welcome back from the break. Our next presentation is by Dr. Rob Lusardi from UC Davis Watershed Science Center in Cal Trout, and his colleague Rochelle Talman from UC Davis Watershed Science Center. And it's really about the technical analysis and the technical tools that go into figuring out what we do after dam removal and how we get these fish back in this habitat. Welcome, guys. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much, Craig. I really appreciate it. Good morning. Yeah, let's get started. So the way this is going to work is I've been doing a lot of science in the basin for some time. I want to acknowledge Barry McCobie, one of my strongest partners and collaborators from the Yurok tribe. Everything that you see here today has been in concert with Barry and Yurok tribe. And then I also want to acknowledge specifically Mark Herford at ODFW, who has also worked on pretty much every component of this, and Tommy Williams at the Southwest Science Center as well, and the Klamath tribes as well, who I'm not sure if they're here, but they've been very helpful. Yeah. So we're going to talk just a little bit about kind of the monitoring that we've been doing to kind of establish a scientific baseline for Klamath dam removal. We have a series of questions that we kind of think about, discuss. How does the physical environment change in the Klamath River pre and post dam removal? How does the biology change with that physical environment change? How do juvenile salmon currently use the Klamath River during their early life history? So when they're juveniles, how does that change post dam removal? And then how will spring run Chinook use upper Klamath Basin, and what role does the lake play in their outmigration and survival? So we'll touch on all these a little bit. We do have some data to show at the end with respect to number 4. So the first thing that we wanted to do with Yurok tribe was really establish kind of long-term sites in the Klamath, and with ODFW as well. So we established 16 sites about probably almost 3 years ago, from Link River, or just below Upper Klamath Lake, down to the mouth of Blue Creek. And those locations, we are collecting continuous water temperature data, and then we're collecting quarterly water chemistry data, nutrients, turbidity, things like that as well. In fact, our crew will be out there, I think next week or the following, doing our kind of October sampling. The temperature thermistors have been very hard to hang on to. They disappear quite frequently, more frequently than most rivers. So that's been a little bit of a hurdle, but we're getting through it, and we're establishing a pretty good baseline there. The second thing that we're working with here is looking at how does the biology change with changes to the physical environment. We're using aquatic invertebrates. This is a specialty of mine. And, you know, invertebrates fish are fantastic. I did my graduate work in fish, but macroinvertebrates will tell you a lot more about kind of quick changes in the river, right? And that's because they have really short life cycles. They're really diverse. So if you get a pulse of really hot water that comes through, you can see very quick changes in the aquatic insect assemblage. So we've established, we've gone through those 16 sites. We're sampling annually, replicated samples. Mark Herford has been huge with helping with that, and Yurok as well, below Iron Gate in particular. And it allows us to quantify kind of changes in biology through space and time. And again, looking from Link River all the way down to Blue Creek. We've really focused on the summer period, but Yurok has done just a wonderful job. And I think they're out there now, or last week, collecting also during spring, fall, and winter as well. And we're trying to figure out a way to get into those samples, ID them, so that we have that baseline set up as well. And then finally, we're also looking at kind of food webs and how those change with dam removal. So this is a collaboration with Allison O'Dowd at HSU. We're using tributaries kind of as controls and looking at the food webs, thinking that they won't change too much kind of up from the mouth of these tributaries or the confluence with the Klamath, and then looking at how the food webs change in the main stem. And we're doing that using carbon and nitrogen isotopes. So basically trying to figure out who's eating who, and then how that changes through post-dam removal as well, which should be a lot of fun. That just got started. We sampled our first time last spring. We'll be out there again. That is also in collaboration with Taz and Karuk as well, which has been really nice. Yurok tribe has just done a great job also looking at kind of changes in fish assemblage, so documenting patterns and movement of fish assemblage at 6 sampling locations, 5 downstream of Iron Gate. So looking at that seasonally, the methods they're employed are typically seines, catching, releasing, measuring, weighing, looking at species, not just looking at salmonids, but looking at non-native species as well. There's some interest to understand kind of how reservoir fish or non-native species fare post-dam removal as well. So there should be some interesting data on that as well. So it should be good. This might take a second. Does anyone know what this is? What is it? Tree stump. Yeah, that's right. I usually get the tree stump cross section, right? So very similar, right? So these are, this is a salmon, this is actually a trout otolith. We can pretend it's a salmon otolith. This fish is from Hat Creek, I think. Yeah, so a lot of my research has used otoliths in collaboration with Rachel Johnson from the Southwest Science Center, looking at kind of incubation period and growth of salmonids, which is really cool work. We can kind of look at how fast these animals are growing and the habitats they're using, and then how long they're incubating, when they're spawning. We can get a lot of data out of this. But more recently, the technology has really developed, and we can begin to use chemical elements within the ear bone, within the otolith, like strontium. Strontium is a naturally occurring element that exists in all watersheds in the ocean as well. And what's cool is we can go through the Klamath Basin to, just by taking water samples, to look at strontium values in all the different tributaries throughout the Klamath Basin. So I went, this is about 2 years ago, around the upper basin with Mark Herford at OFW sampling, and then the lower basin with help of Yurok, and we collected about 45 samples. And we found that there is good, the data just came back last month, it took a while. We found that there's good diversification of strontium in the watershed. So that means the Scott River has a very distinct signal compared to the Shasta River, compared to the Sprague, the Williamson, et cetera, right? And so as these fish, as juveniles rear in these different habitats, they incorporate that strontium into their ear bones, right? So when the adults come back, as you see here, and during carcass surveys, we can pull otoliths and we can go back in time to understand where these fish reared in the watershed, which is very cool, and also for how long they reared in some cases as well. There's a paper that came out on steelhead in 2010 by Brian Hodge and Becca Kionis and some others that looked at this. And so we're using some of their data in the lower basin, but we wanted to collect our own kind of chemistry data from up top as well. And so, as I said, we've collected 43 distinct locations throughout the watershed. We have good diversification of that strontium. We now have 40 pair of fall run otoliths from the last 2 years. We'll get them this year as well. We're working with Fish and Wildlife Service in Yurok on getting those otoliths. And in fact, I was just in the, we use a laser to ablate these otoliths and get the chemistry off them. And we were just there last week looking at that, and it went really well. So it's very cool. This laser has like 7 machines set up, and the last machine is a computer, and the data just kind of shows up there. It's kind of like magic. I don't fully understand it, but Rachel tells me it's good. So the point is, I think what's really interesting is here is we're going to have a baseline of pre-dam removal and get a really good idea of where these juvenile fish rear, how long they're there, what habitats they're using, and then the fun really starts when the dams come out. We'll get to look at how they are moving into the upper basin, what habitats they're using, what habitats they're not using. It's iterative in the sense that we can really look at locations where maybe restoration has occurred and a lot of money has gone into these locations. And we want to know, are fish using this habitat? We should be able to tell that. So I'm very excited about this component of the research as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Rochelle, who's a graduate student at UC Davis, who I've had the pleasure of working with for the last couple of years. Rochelle's going to talk about spring run Chinook use in the upper Klamath Basin.
Good morning, everybody. Before I get into it, I just want to give some quick shout outs to some of our collaborators. Mark Hereford is like the biggest one. He helps me with every step of this project. He's helped me coordinate the tags and the sites. And then in addition, a shout out to Shawnee Rich and Farron Case. They helped pick out all my sites along the Williamson River. And then Tommy Williams and Bob Haganuko from NOAA with the funding for this project. So basically what we did this past spring is we did an experimental release with spring run Chinook salmon in the upper Klamath River Basin. And we were really interested in looking at what role do the tributaries, upper Klamath Lake, and Lake River Dam play with their outmigration and survival. So for this study, we looked at, in particular, the Williamson River and the Wood River as the 2 tributaries. And we decided to use acoustic telemetry to monitor their survival because it's a really great mark recapture method that has a really high detection efficiency. So compared to pit tags, they do a really great job of actually detecting a fish as it goes by. If you're working in like an estuary, they're wonderful because they don't seem to get affected by salinity as much. And in this case, our receiver is only about 2.5 feet tall, which means I can easily move them to another location if I decide there's another area of interest that I want to look at. So in these pictures, you can actually see that there's a fish on our surgery block. I'm sewing the fish up. And then in the bottom left-hand corner is an actual picture of the tags that we use. So on the left side of the tag is the battery, which is what powers the tag, and on the right side is the transducer, which is what emits the signal for the unique identification code. So we ended up doing our acoustic tagging and release basically the last week of March. As you can see here, it took kind of a small army to get it done. We actually had 5 tagging stations, and we tagged just over 1,000 fish. They were evenly divided between the Wood and Williamson River, and then we kept around 100 fish that got transported to Oregon State University so that I could monitor their battery life and then surge in effect on the fish. So for the final release numbers, we released 513 fish in the Williamson, 513 in the Wood, and about 3 weeks later, we downloaded all the receivers that we had deployed. And if you see in this map, it might be a little hard to see, our release locations are these little red dots here, and anything you see as orange dots are our receiver locations, and anything that is a blue dot is a sign that I had a dual array, which means that I had 2 lines going across the river so that I could get directionality of the fish. When I get this data, acoustic telemetry is really based on noise, so you get a lot of detections that are not actual fish. So one of the things I have to do is I have to go through and filter out false detections. So one of the filters that I used was that there had to be at least 4 detections within a 2-minute interval. These tags were set to ping every 5 seconds, so under the most pristine conditions, I should have had close to 25 detections, but that's not usually how it works in the river, so we said that for me to count it as a fish, it had to have been detected 4 times in that interval. And before I show you kind of the rough data, this data is not final, it's just based on detections. It's not to say this is the true number of fish that actually went by my receivers. That's something that I'm hoping to kind of go over in the next couple months and refine. So accounting for how well my receivers detected fish as well as possible predation in these areas. So at the mouth of the Wood, by the end of April, we had 396 individuals or detections. We had 351 at the mouth of the Williamson. We had 24 fish that approached Link River Dam, and then we had 18 fish that were detected downstream of Link River Dam. In June, we did another full download. We had 457 detections down at the mouth of the Wood, 374 at the mouth of the Williamson, 53 that approached Link River Dam, and 39 that had been detected downstream of the dam. And we did our final download in September because at this point, most of the acoustic tags should be dead at this point. We had 466 detections at the mouth of the Wood, 378 at the mouth of the Williamson, 59 that approached Link River Dam, and 50 that were detected downstream of Link River Dam. So going forward, we are going to be doing another release this year. However, we're going to be doing some changes based on what we found so far. We're interested in doing more staggered releases, which should be interesting because then we can look at survival compared to different release groups. I'm interested in deploying additional receivers in the lake as well as Pelican Bay because we did get some detections of our fish in Pelican Bay using a pit tag reader. And one of the things going forward that we're also potentially interested in is using different age classes with these fish. So right now with this study, we're using yearlings, but in the future, we might be interested in using young of the year as well. And then Rob. Yeah, go ahead. And this is just our acknowledgements. It took a lot of different groups to make these projects happen. I'm super grateful for all the collaboration that we've done, and it wouldn't have been possible without them.
Yeah, very specifically, ODW, Caltrout, Bob and Tommy, we've and Yurok and Karuk as well. This everything we've done so far is not possible to do ourselves, right? It's a massive watershed, and one of the bright spots about it is been our ability to now work across state, right? The river runs 2 states, and so working in the upper basin has been a lot of fun too. So, yeah, thank you.
It's really exciting to know that spring Chinook were swimming around up there this year. Makes me really happy. Our next speaker, Bill Tripp, someone I really enjoyed working for a lot of years. And I think one thing that I know I'm guilty of, and I think a lot of conservationists have been guilty of that work on fish, the fish people, we fish people, is not thinking enough about fire. And I think this year, this was really raised by a massive fish kill in the Klamath River after the McKinney fire. And I think it really demonstrates what I think Karuk have been beating into me for the last couple of decades I've worked there, is how all things are interconnected. And so I think that relationship between fish and fire is something we have to think more about. I know Bill Tripp thinks about it all the time. Bill Tripp is the director of the Karuk Tribe Department of Natural Resources. He is the co-chair of the Western Region of the National Cohesive Wildland Management Strategy. I think I got that right. He is on the CAL FIRE Native American Wildfire Council, and he's recently been nominated to President Biden's Wildfire Commission. So, Bill, we look forward to hearing about you and the traditional use of fire in the Klamath. Thanks.
Mahi yav nani tuyum chipakpak. Good morning. My name is, I am named after the robin, but contemporarily known as Bill Tripp. The conversation on fire and fish has been one that's been going on for quite some time, but not necessarily in the mainstream. In my life, it's been something I was kind of born into. I really appreciated Vice Chairman Meyer's comments on the lessons learned from the matriarch of the village, and that's the place I come from as well. And, you know, by the time I was 8 years old, I was burning around the village, you know, by myself. And I you know, I had chosen to make that my life's work. And so, you know, it's interesting, you know, you're burning and not having anyone really come around and mess with you for so long. They're starting to do that now a little more. But we're building systems to enable, you know, the people to get fire returned to their hands again. And so, you know, it's tough. It's tough working in these systems where the government agencies have claimed ownership of something that we believe is rightfully our responsibility to place and to all of the animals out there. I really appreciate the fact that everyone is taking that approach in this forum to learn from the animals and do what the animals need, because that is how we originally learned. As Indigenous people, and that is our responsibility to learn those lessons again. They're still there. We have the foundation, and we can, you know, bring those stories back out of the people to get us back to what these things need to look like. You know, we recognized early on, you know, that we needed to restore fire alongside the removal of the dams and the restoration of salmon in the basin. We also realized that the agency wasn't going to listen to tribal voices. And so we built collaborative systems where we could send an Indigenous message through non-Indigenous voices. And these things are all starting to come back full circle through some of those original collaborations, you know, 20 some odd years ago, where partners like Loma Katsi started doing workforce development and stewardship agreement demonstrations in Region 6 because Region 5 simply wouldn't listen to it. And, you know, people like the Hayfork Watershed Research and Training Center were out, you know, convincing that non-Indigenous voice to maybe not even know that they're sending an Indigenous message. You know, we started out in our conversations about Indigenous fire use and their connection to fish, and salmon in particular, around the World Renewal ceremonies at Off-Field Mountain at Cudamine, where, you know, up until 1911, we were rolling logs off the mountain that represented turtles, and a coyote story of how a coyote stole fire to give it back to the people, and or give it to the people that were coming. And so, you know, we've been working for almost 30 years now to try to restore that. And that's kind of a key piece. That's the piece that holds Salamander's prayer for the water cycle. And, you know, it wasn't the reason we didn't start with the conversation around burning ceremonial at Black Mountain as part of the Tushonic World Renewal ceremonies is because we didn't think anyone can fathom that, you know, people could pull off lighting the top of the mountain off in the full moon in August. You know, with the frequent fire regime, you pretty much need that warm, dry weather and that northeast wind event to dry things out and to push things around when it's burned every year. And so the scale of restoration that we're looking at is phenomenal. But the systems to get it done are being built. You know, the people worry about smoke and they worry about anthropogenic practices needing to be regulated and all these things. But, you know, the indigenous management practices and principles behind what we need to get done on the ground are natural. You know, the very term indigenous means natural to place. And so, you know, a lot of times, you know, I heard wilderness mentioned as well. You know, a lot of times good intentions lead to outcomes that block us from implementing solutions. You know, we see the same thing in the Endangered Species Act. You know, we have to use that act to protect what we care about, but we also create problems. You know, we're not going to be able to restore black oak woodlands and burn them in the right time of year if we can't get around the fact that putting smoke in the air in February, March is take. But that's, so in a time where everyone's trying to expedite NEPA processes and CEQA processes, you know, we have to take the long road and do an EIS just to do it right. And so these are all challenges that we're going to face in the coming years. But for the Hockaday project, which is our Spirit People's Mountain, off-field mountain, we are doing a NEPA process, we are doing an EIS, and we are going to be restoring conditions conducive of ceremonial burning on off-field mountain again. Our next step is to move down to Black Mountain and look to revitalizing that as part of the Shoshonic River Renewal ceremonies. You know, the smoke that's generated in that time of year, you know, shades the river, and it you know, makes it to where the sun can't heat the water up as much. It does a whole lot of other things. You know, I mean, it changes the way trees use water. You know, there are some differences between those pieces at Teshonic and at Cuttimine, but those are fairly large-scale landscape-scale burns. And, you know, we've just recently started to bring that story out to the public in regards to what goes on there at Teshonic, or is supposed to go on there at Teshonic, is at that certain time when Fatawena does a belly flop into the mouth of Camp Creek there and sends that ripple down the river, and that ripple carries that prayer to call the salmon up. You know, a person might think, oh, that's just something that happens, right? Well, at the same time, when that loud noise happens from that belly flop, the top of that mountain's supposed to be getting lit on fire. And so the heat from the fire and all these different interactions with the smoke over the streams and all these things, you know, make it to where less water evapotranspirates and there's less solar heating on the stream itself. And so the water still gets pulled up when it's taken in that carbon at night, but it doesn't get sent up in the air as quickly during the day. And so that changes that diurnal flow and that pulse and that ripple that comes out of Camp Creek and travels to the mouth and can just change things ever so slightly to where it can chew through that sandbar and let salmon come up the river. And so there's connections like this, you know, throughout all of these practices. And, you know, as Chairman Attebery said, you know, reintegrating traditional ecological knowledge and using our tools in Western science to get back to the revitalization of these practices and getting these principles and getting these practices back in place is going to be fairly critical. So, you know, I mean, there's been a lot that has changed over this last 20 years. And, you know, Lomakatsi was very successful with their workforce development, and they did bring stewardship agreements back to Region 5, and they are starting to spread through the region. And, you know, Hayfork Watershed Research and Training Center did go out there and, you know, help to build, you know, the Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition in Western Montana, and build, you know, and to recruit, you know, Lynn Decker with the Nature Conservancy's North American Fire Programs Initiative, and built these networks of people that are really deeply ingrained with the philanthropic sector. And so we talk about what's next. What do we build next? We reintegrate. We need to reintegrate the in-stream and the upslope factors towards all working together. We've got beavers restored, but we don't forget about porcupine. And we restore those black oak woodlands that were turned into conifer plantations that are just waiting for a wind event and an ignition to happen that's burning down our communities and killing people. And then creating situations to where the monsoonal moisture and the changing climate comes up and then just dumps 4 inches of rain in hours and kills fish in 50-mile stretch of the river. You know, these are the realities we face, and these are the realities why we got to do both of these things at the same time. And, you know, it's like, I just can't I can't even communicate how much I appreciate the fact that I was able to step away and take that path I promised my elders I would take, knowing that there were so many people pushing for the fish and the dams. And you know, it's been a long road, and it's coming together finally. And so there are a lot of things that we do need to still push to really cross the finish line. These things are a continuum of practice to get it right. And you know, we just had our first ever Indigenous women's treks to the Prescribed Fire Training Exchange, where we had Indigenous women from all around the globe come to Karuk country and burn basket materials on private properties. And it was just great to see some of these systems getting broke down. You know, we did use the incident command system. It's a really effective tool for moving people around, but there was also a recognition that the term mop up, or going out to put the fire out, is a militaristic term that was used when they were going out to kill the rest of the Indians, you know. That's, and so these things hurt people. And so we have to be aware of these things when we're building our new systems. And so we changed the term to Iship. You know, if we were going to go out and we're going to extinguish this fire today. And so just to see that start to revitalize language and practice and actually have all of our non-tribal allies, you know, struggling to say the words, you know, it's kind of a recognition of you know, of our struggles, you know, to learn how to speak in those terms ourselves, in the non-Indigenous terms ourselves. Yeah, so there's, I don't know how much time is left, but, okay. So there's some things going on right now in state policy and federal policy that are potentially paradigm shifting activities, you know, with this Biden Commission, Biden's Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission. There's an opportunity to enact change. And so, you know, understanding that words matter, we really need to think about the words we use. You know, what are we doing that actually should be classified as natural? Fire exclusion is an anthropogenic practice that has created the conditions that we're in today. How do we reclassify the way we message these things so we can enact policy change to create the enabling conditions, but not open the door for all the bad things to come in and run us over again? And, you know, and so that way, you know, we can learn to refine a little better how we can make those good intentions lead to those good things that are done a little bit easier process-wise. Yeah, I don't know how much, you know, fire is being returned to the communities where you're all from. But, you know, I mean, this is going to have to spread like wildfire to be effective. And it's starting to in Karuk country, Yurok country, Hoopa country. You know, we just now started to get some of the first investments from philanthropy to demonstrate cultural burning, and along with that words matter conversation. You know, we really need to make sure we're differentiating what prescribed fire is versus cultural burning. Cultural burning is of and by the people. Prescribed fire is something that's already too deeply ingrained into the agencies that we're going to have to use agency process, agency culture, but try to shift that with our words and our actions and our relationships. And so I guess with that, I'll go ahead and close and give us a little bit of the 8 minutes back if there's something left now. I appreciate that, Bill, and I really appreciate the quip about you know, your non-native allies struggling with the language.
you all probably don't know this about me because I hide it so well, but I have a really thick Southern drawl. And sometimes I think I speak Karuk with a twang sometimes. But people tolerate it pretty well, and I do appreciate it. But our next speaker, you always talk about if you want to get something done, you have to ask a busy person. And I think our next speaker really embodies that. I've known Poppy as long as I've known anybody else in this room, I think, for a lot of years, even before I came up to work on the Klamath. And I'm always amazed at all the stuff she does. Poppy is of Hoopa, Karuk, Yurok, and Chimariko descent. She's a member of the Hoopa Valley Tribe. She's the Karuk Tribe's appointee to the Klamath River Renewal Corporation's Board of Directors. She's a very talented basket maker, cultural arts teacher, and recently went back to school to get a master's degree in archaeology. She really does embody that, like, if you want something done, ask a busy person, kind of person. And I think that whenever I think about Poppy, and one of the most powerful moments in this whole effort getting here, when we went to Omaha to protest at the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting, Poppy came and had 3 young women with her in brush dance regalia. And the way the meeting used to work, it turns out, like a lot of other agencies, Berkshire Hathaway has changed a lot of the rules about how they do their business since they've met Klamath folks. It used to be, if you wanted to attend the shareholders meeting, they'd throw the doors open at 8 in the morning, and whoever's in the front of the line would run in there and run to a microphone, and then it was in this giant auditorium, and they would just take turns letting people ask Warren Buffett questions. And of course, we stayed up all night and camped out at the front of the line, and so when they opened the door, everybody kind of bum rushed the microphones. But Poppy was there, and when she walked up to ask the question to Buffett about Klamath River dams, those young women walked with her, and we were in this coliseum that probably sat 30,000 people, and the room felt dead silent, and I can still remember the sound of those brush dance skirts. Those skirts are covered in shells that kind of jingle when they walk. And I can remember that's the only thing you could hear in that auditorium was the jingle of those dresses. And I kind of, it was one of those moments where I'm like, yeah, turns out we're going to remove dams. I know right now. And that was a moment. So I always think, when I think of you, I think about that moment. Bobby, I can't wait to hear you give your talk. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to run with off of the back of Mr. Myers and Attebery and kind of extend on what they shared with you earlier about balance and holistic healing. Originally, I thought I was speaking at the annual convention again, the annual gathering, and then I figured out later, oh, wait a minute, this is a tribal summit meeting, so I need to shift my messaging a little bit. But I'm really glad to see so many of you, different faces and faces that I have had the opportunity to work with along the way. I'm very honored to be here, and thank you, Dana, for inviting me. The California genocide was the killing of thousands of indigenous peoples in California by the United States agents and private citizens. Up to 16,000 Native Americans died in California from the 1840s through the 1870s. Most of the deaths occurred during hundreds of massacres, during which state and local militias encircled and murdered Native peoples. This historical act of genocide was facilitated by discriminatory California laws and the outright support of state officials and federal authorities who condoned and supported those attacks. Our ancestors were not treated like other human beings. They were treated as if they had no purpose. They were called savages that needed to be confined. For many years, our people, I told myself I was not going to do this today. Our people were shuffled around like cattle. The mission of the government was to destroy our race. For the valuable resources we have, gold mining remnants still plague the rivers and the ceremonial grounds that belong to the Karuk people. Governor Gavin Newsom recently apologized for the actions of the federal government in a statement for the world to witness. He said, "It's called genocide." That's what it was, a genocide. And there's no other way to describe it. And that's the way it needs to be described in the history books. Today, Native people are still trying to recover mentally and spiritually from this destruction. Through time, the government tried many ways to eliminate us, but our people were fierce and defended their territories. Like all other tribes in the country, they were forced to sign agreements called treaties, executive orders, and federal statutes. They were forced to form modern-day government systems instead of using our traditional laws. Our people began to educate themselves in a formal manner in order to stand up for our rights. They eventually began to figure out these systems and started to use this knowledge to our benefit. Although we have made great strides towards self-sufficiency, we lack the ability to live our lives in the manner that Creator intended us to do. We are consumed daily with federal laws that control our everyday affairs. We are distinct in nature, and our actions are molded by the land we come from. Therefore, you must understand why we function the way we do. Pre-contact, Native American people lived a life of true balance. Everyday social structure was conformed by the environment. We were gifted the rights to live on this land as long as we took care of it. The lessons of how to manage were provided to the people through sacred passages and spiritual beings of higher power. We were told, if you live a life of balancing the ecosystem, you will always be taken care of. The lessons of living in balance prepared the people to manage the land for eternity. This ancient religion includes lessons from the land, water, birds, trees, plants, and all living and non-living things. Since time immemorial, our Native people have lived a life of symbolism. The environment from which we come from holds the lessons, rules, and history, just as the Bible does for a Christian man or woman. For example, the woodpecker is honored as a sacred item in our ceremonies and is chosen because it mates for life. The woodpecker wears the color black, which signifies the trials of learning the lessons or the knowledge that was handed down, and the color of red, which signifies to us actually living that knowledge. This gathering chart only shows you some of the traditional foods and teas, but does not show you any of the ceremonial activities that are held annually. These ceremonies are of great importance and bring all of the rules of the forest to a central place of prayer. The people did and still try to live their life balancing the world through ancient management practices and ceremony. Native people have always lived a repetitious lifestyle, one that circles the moon and provides seasonal gathering opportunities in order to subside. Repetitious gathering was and still is a part of the rules that were orally handed down from generation to generation and help balance the landscape. Although many of our people were murdered, starved, or relocated, some of our people survived, and that is why we are still here today. Some say our people are like salmon, resilient.
This new world brought years of devastation to the river people. This list reflects some of those hardships we've endured and continue to be inflicted upon us today. Through time, tribes dwindled to a handful of fluent speakers and traditional basket weavers. Native religion was on the decline as fast as laws were being created to control the way Native people should subside. Even though forced agreements exist between our people and the federal government, they have proven to be hollow as we've had to transform over time to a life of fighting for our rights. During my analysis of history, I separated time into sequels and several chapters of genocide. There are chapters of genocide that Native people went through to get to where we are today. The first chapter of genocide came in the manner of massacres. The second chapter of genocide came as forced assimilation, and the third chapter came in the form of control of an entire race. I would add, this chapter will not end until we do prevail. The New World was not designed to bring good fortune to our people. It was designed to build an invisible border, a wall around a race of people with special rules to keep them confined so all others could prosper. Assimilation schools taught more than Christianity to Native people. It taught neglect, starvation, sexual, mental, and physical abuse. Many of you have probably heard the term historical trauma. Historical trauma is real and has caused generational trauma that spread like wildfire. Families suffer from social phobia, anxiety, depression, and other mental illnesses. After the boarding school era was over, our people soon realized traditional land management was no longer acceptable, but rather frowned upon by the government. The land and water mismanagement added more trauma. The historical management of the land and water continues to negatively impact us generationally. One of our biggest recreational activities has always been swimming at the river and the creeks. In addition, our people suffer from high rates of disease and diabetes and also cancer. For example, in my immediate family alone, my son is a cancer survivor. My father passed from leukemia 2 years ago, and my grandmother from breast cancer last December. If you think about it, I am only one person on this river. One person who has faced cancer 3 times. Today, Today we add a new chapter, as we have seen a new form of genocide called transformation. Continue genocide? Yes. Committed daily by the federal, state, and county governments. Every move we make is regulated in one form or another. The reality is, we have been forced to transform ourselves away from what is truly important to us. We have formed a new religion, a new culture, where many of our people congregate to fight the modern world, that most of us want nothing to do with. The transformation takes us from our social norms, removes us from our integrated systems, belief systems, our traditions, and duties that are supposed to govern and influence our daily actions. For example, when I was first approached to attend a meeting with Scottish Power, I said no out of fear of flying. Flying over the ocean was not in my comfort zone. My place was sitting on the river, fishing with my children and weaving baskets. I did not want to associate with the outside world, as I was content doing what I was doing. Once I figured out the fish I was catching were sick, I got on a plane the following year and flew to Scotland. From that day forward, my transformation as a person began. I began to educate myself and associate myself with activists who had the same concerns as I did. This research, travel, time away from family, all equates to losing our culture and who we really were meant to be. What many people don't realize is this transformation is a continued form of genocide. It takes people away from who we are and what we are supposed to be doing, managing the water and land in a traditional manner. Our people have come so far. We have built relationships with people like yourself, people who share the same ideologies or ethical belief systems when it comes to proper land and water management. Restorative justice means being able to fix the earth and heal in a holistic manner. Through the application of fire, dam removal, growth and ceremonies, documenting and teaching the language in our schools, reviving culture, teaching basketry and land management skills, and developing programs that provide healing, physical and spiritual and mental well-being in our communities is making us stronger every day. Sometimes I am asked what life will be like without dams, or when these dams come down. Most of the time, I am speechless, just like Mr. Myers said. The elders saw decades flash before their eyes, and that's what I see. When I'm asked the question, what will it be like? I see the people flash before my eyes who we lost. Dam removal is a reminder of all the people who have fought for restorative justice. It is a reminder of how strong and weak we are, all at the same time. Strong because we are all united like our ancestors were, and weak because of political bureaucracy. It brings fear of the unknown, and it brings joy to know we are all going to stand together to bring the world back into balance for future generations. Bill, Mr. Tripp had talked about fire, and that was one of the videos I wanted to share with you in closing, was a fire of a cultural burn we did in the spring, which was a collaborative effort between the 3 tribes. And like many of you have expressed today, the importance of holistic healing and keeping strong and being team members like we have been. We wouldn't have been able to do it without each other intertribally and without all of you folks and scientists from around the world. So thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Dr. Kutcha Riesling-Baldi is Associate Professor and Department Chair of Native American Studies at Cal Poly Humboldt. She researches indigenous feminisms, California Indians, traditional ecological knowledge, and decolonization. She is co-director of the NAS Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workshop Space at Humboldt, and co-investigator on an NSF Includes Planning Grant for inclusive STEM pedagogy for Native American students at Humboldt. She is also the interim program coordinator for the Environment and Community Master's degree at Cal Poly Humboldt. Her book, We Are Dancing for You, Native Feminisms and the Revitalization of Women's Coming of Age Ceremonies, received the Best First Book in Native American and Indigenous Studies at the 2019 Native American Indigenous Studies Association Conference. She received her PhD in Native American Studies at UC Davis, her Master's in Fine Arts in Creative Writing from San Diego State, and her BA in Psychology with a specialization in Health and Development from Stanford. She is also the volunteer executive director for the Native Women's Collective, a nonprofit organization that focuses on the continued revitalization of Native American arts and culture. She is Hoopa, Karuk, and Yurok, and she's an enrolled member of the Hoopa Valley Tribe. We're very lucky to have her with us, Dr. Kutcha Baldi.
Try to make this work because I brought my computer up here to talk from, but I like that Craig called me the headliner, and my first response was going to be like, but not the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I was driving through Hoopa yesterday to come out here, and everybody was lining up for the concert, and I thought really for a second, I was like, if I pulled over, I'm sure I could talk my way in there. But I wanted to say that been watching all the videos online. If you haven't heard, the Red Hot Chili Peppers played a free concert in Hoopa yesterday just because they wanted to do something cool in Hoopa. And I think that that's amazing. I think that that's really, really amazing for our young people. And I'm very excited to hear about what that does for the visions of our young people, to think about themselves in the context of like this world and the excitement that they can bring to the things that they want to do. I like to talk about things when I come into spaces about the way that people are constantly telling Indigenous peoples about what's impossible, and how we're always going into spaces being like, hey, you should do this, or you should try that, and everybody goes, that's impossible. We'll never do that. That'll never happen. Why are you talking about it like that would happen? And now I have another example of an impossible thing happening in my lifetime. I think if you would have told us 5 years ago that the Red Hot Chili Peppers would be in the Hoopa Gym playing a free concert for Hoopa youth, people would have been like, that's impossible. But here, Flea comes standing up on stage rooting for the Hoopa football team, right? And they're visiting like the local villages. I think if you would have told me that Anthony Kiedis would be standing in Takmilden looking at our houses, talking about the importance of this ongoing cultural revitalization, someone would have told you that was impossible. They would have told you it was impossible that Tuluat was going to get returned to the Wiyot peoples. They would have told you that it was impossible that land would be returned to the Yurok peoples, who many, many years ago weren't even a federally recognized tribe. They would have told you that was impossible. They would have told you that dam removal was impossible. And I think that when people started talking about it at first, they were probably told, you're dreaming too big, that's never going to happen. That will never, ever happen in our lifetime. There's no way that anybody could ever make that happen. They would have told you that was impossible. But impossible things are happening in my lifetime. So we don't get to say that anything is impossible anymore. We have to just continue to do the work to make it possible. I always use this example. I say, if you could travel back in time and talk to Thomas Jefferson, which you shouldn't do because he's kind of an asshole. But if you could tell him, you could say, hey, don't worry, in 2020, there's going to be an Indigenous woman in charge of the Department of the Interior. Don't worry, that will include the Bureau of Land Management and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And he would look at you and he would say, that's impossible. Yet, here we are in this world today, living all of the things they told us was impossible. I want us to think about what's possible now, what we can build for the future, what the world looks like, what an impossible world is, because we are the ones that can make it possible. In Indigenous contexts, what we say is that nothing can come into being until we story it first. We talk stories so that we can make things possible, make things happen. We tell stories about it before it even exists, or we tell stories about it as if it could exist. This is how we make things happen for ourselves. We have to say out loud what we want it to be. It's kind of like creating a hypothesis in science, what we think we could make possible. Then we talk about it, we build it, and we take every single tiny step forward to make something like that happen. and then things come to us. Because oftentimes what we're trying to bring into being is the way that the world would actually make more sense. I always tell people we live in a world of settler colonialism. This is a world where they won't even give you a house to live in. They won't even give you food to eat. They won't even give you the things you need to live. We can't even drink the water or breathe the air. It doesn't make any sense. Why would we live in a world like this? Why would we ever create a world like this? We know the world is supposed to be different than the world that we live in. We feel it, we understand it, we think about it, and then we're told it's impossible. And yet Indigenous peoples are the very embodiment of the world from before. We know the world before dams. We have lived it, we have felt it, we have passed it along in our stories. We remember it through a blood memory that gets carried on generation to generation. We repeat the stories because we know that they are true. Because we know that world from before, we also know there will be a world after. Settler colonialism, very short, timeline-wise, 150, 250 years, 500 years, that's nothing compared to 15,000, 20,000, or time immemorial. It's just itty-bitty. So because we know the world before, we are the threats to the world now. We've always been treated as a threat to the world now, something that needed to be displaced, removed, forgotten, because we were the ones that could remind people this doesn't make any sense. Why would we build a giant concrete wall that salmon couldn't swim through? Who thought that was a good idea? You know, there were people going like, I don't think that's a good idea at the time that it was being built, and now we're trying to justify it as if it's still supposed to be here. No, it needs to go. It's actually kind of pretty simple. I think it's like a simple conclusion to a very complex system that has been put into place to make us feel crazy. Like somehow we don't know that the world doesn't make sense this way. I use Manifest Destiny as my biggest example of this. I ask people, like, how many people here at some point in their elementary school education had to learn about Manifest Destiny? And most people will be like, I did. And I'll be like, probably around like the 3rd or 4th grade. Yeah. Why would they teach you that in the 3rd or 4th grade? What does that do for you as a 3rd grader? Oh, by the way, God gave us the right to all of this land. That's not a thing. If we explained it, if an alien came down and was like, what's Manifest Destiny? And you're like, God gave us this right to the land. They'd be like, wait, what? That's not a thing. Where's that written down? Who has the email from God? Nobody. It's made up. It's a made-up thing to help justify to us this world. And so we know we're living in an illogical way. We know that we're not supposed to be doing this. We try to push back against it, and we keep getting told it's impossible. But what Native peoples do is help to build an imagination, a liberatory imagination beyond colonialism. Helps us to remind us that this period of time is very short. And maybe colonialism and capitalism has done a number on the place that we're at right now, but we can do what we need to do to make the world go back into balance. It's possible. We've been talking about this since the beginning. I do a lot of work in what they call decolonization. People always wonder what that is. I said, it's ultimately that eventually we're going to get all our land back. Enjoy the process. It's going to be super fun, I promise. But ultimately, it also asks us to think about the world in a very different way. Who are we here for? What are we responsible to? We in Indigenous peoples and places say we're responsible to our more than human relatives, to the earth itself. We reframe the whole framework of how we exist here to decenter human beings, as in Homo sapien, right, bipedal, and instead into our more than human relatives and all of us together. And most of our stories are talking to us about what that world is, what it looks like and our responsibility to it, and how when it falls out of balance, we have the tools we need to put it back into place. That's our world renewal ceremonies. That's our cultural ways of being. That's our connection to history and land that has been built for time immemorial. We have that knowledge. And in explaining that to other people, what I say is we invite you in to kind of learn from it to help decolonize the way that you think about your own work and the work that you're doing, and to start to see the world very differently. So I want us to take a moment here to consider, I put up this map for you all in case you haven't seen it. The map was created by Mark Clark, a geographer from Central Valley, and he says of the map, quote, "The Central Valley used to have a big lake and lots of marshes from water runoff from the mountains. Dams and irrigation stopped all that many years ago. But I've always wondered what it looked like around here before that." He created a map based on all of his research to show you what does California look like in 1851 prior to what happened through the detriment of invasion, or what some people call settler colonialism or colonization. Now I want you to think about this landscape, and then the landscape that we currently live in. One that's shaped not just by natural history and indigenous management practices, but also by ongoing settler colonialism, capitalism, and the erasure of our long-term historical knowledge that has been built for time immemorial, our long-term engagement of land, water, and management practices, which now get squished into a time that is often referred to as pre-Columbian or prehistoric, even though it encapsulates thousands upon thousands of years of scientific knowledge. This is the landscape in which we lived, very different than the one that's been shaped by capitalism and colonialism, where you see a dry landscape, an overused landscape. We're supposed to have a giant lake in the middle of California. To think about the very different ways that we understood what that meant and looked like. And then to think about what development, right, and progress has meant because of the invasion of colonization in this area. Now, when I think about what we were doing, I often talk about traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous science, based on thousands upon thousands of years of empirical evidence, and thinking about how we connected our science to culture and spirituality. That we said you couldn't do science without understanding the place that it had in the world, and that it was interconnected amongst all things and peoples. That science wasn't apolitical, it was necessarily political, spiritual, cultural, and it built everlasting connections between peoples and place. Now, Western science constantly gets a little bit separated from traditional ecological knowledge. This creates the idea in my mind that somehow our science is not equitable to Western science, and relatives under science become resources. And the separation between human and more than human beings is often solidified through the language of science that dominates policies, politics, laws, and governance. So people, native people, and our interrelationship becomes something that they refer to as mythology, legend, fables, theories, instead of scientific practice. Now, science disciplines don't require their students to major or minor in Native American studies, which is a discipline that comes from us. That's my discipline. And I think that what happens is that then I get invited later to go to science and government organizations to kind of train them on Native peoples, Native knowledges, Native places. And they often ask me, what more can we do so that we can do this in a good way? And I say, why don't you start by saying that as a scientist, you have to take Native American studies? Why not make this a part of your priorities the way you make all science majors take chemistry or biology or all those other ologies? Western science influenced salmon governance. It influences the way people talk in policy and in law. It influences the way people think about us as indigenous peoples, how they classify us and understand us. We have been constantly fighting for salmon, but we are treated as native tribes, not as sovereign nations, but as stakeholders. And oftentimes, we are classified with words like consultation, rather than integral or ancestral partners to the salmon. Indigenous peoples, we have distinct and very informed ancient knowledges about the natural world. I think one of the things that I remember growing up learning from elders is that they would constantly work with Western scientists and ethnographers and anthropologists, and they would refer to them as very young in terms of the age or maturity of their disciplines and knowledge. They would say, their 150 years of knowledge as Western scientists is not nearly as old as our thousands upon thousands of years of knowledge. They would say Western disciplines are new to beginning to build knowledge of this place. And here we are, the elders of this area. I would often say, why would you work with these people? They treat us like we're not very smart. They don't take what we say and put it into action. And my uncle would say, it's kind of like working with toddlers. You know, Western scientists, they'll come to you all the time and say, I know, like a toddler would. They're growing up. We're helping them to grow up in this place. Now, when we see ourselves as interconnected to the landscape that we live in, we also think about like our rivers and our waters and the ways in which we talk about these things and places that we embody. For us, our rivers are veins, arteries, necessary to the basic functioning of the entire world. What happens, our elders will ask us, when you dam up your artery? You will cause major damage to your body. Each and every part of this system works together to keep you healthy and functioning. It is the same with our rivers. We remake ourselves in accountability to water, to remind us that we have water memory. In Hoopa, we define ourselves in relationship to water, but more than that, we understand our place in the world based on how water views the world and not how we view the water. Our directions are views from the river that run through our valley, and worldview actually becomes water view, a view from the river, not a view of the river. We move upriver or downriver, to the river or from the river. So our theoretical standpoint foregrounds water, and our reclaiming of knowledge is not just for people, but for water. Not just looking at our relationship to water, but our accountability to water. Now, salmon itself, too, we think of those as interrelated species to us. We have been classifying and categorizing, building fisheries science around salmon for thousands upon thousands of years. Some of the greatest moments of Hoopa history that I can talk about are people looking at the integration of salmon into their knowledge systems. We look at salmon as really key to who we are as people. They're demonstrative of how the world is doing. Are we doing well? Do we need to improve? Look to the salmon. They are some of our first and most important teachers. Now, with us in the Trinity River area, what we say, the Trinity River runs through the center of the Hoopa Valley. It's the vein, it's the artery that runs through all of us. The salmon themselves return to the Trinity River to spawn. And they travel from the Trinity to the Klamath River, to the mouth of the Klamath, where they live, and then come back to spawn. Our salmon, much as our people, return. In Hoopa, what we call our valley is Natanuf, which means where the trails return. And all peoples, beings, return home, here to the Hoopa Valley. Our fish and human shared history make sure that we understand the health of the environment as being tied to the health of the fish. And when we look at the way that we negotiate on behalf of the fish, what we're thinking about is, what does it mean to look at the world from the fish's perspective and point of view? How do we understand what the fish need? When we think of water rights in California, it's often repeated, first in time, first in line. I actually learned that when I was a very tiny child. I don't know why, but apparently because we exist as political agents no matter what. As children, I was brought to many, many places, and I remember learning first in time, first in line. Now, some people might think, who's first in time? Who's first in line? And while the law has been set up to be very convoluted about what that means or how we enact that, we always have said Indigenous peoples are some of the first in time, therefore some of the first in line. However, we must also remember that it is salmon who are the first in time. Salmon who should be the first in line, here for millions of years, caring and making this place for us. In Hoopa, what we say is, before this world, there was the time of animals, and before that, there was the time of the Kahenai, and all of them worked together to make this world for us the way we would need it so that we could thrive. They did all of that for us, and what they asked in return is that we care for it the way that it deserves so that everything could be here in a good way. Salmon, millions of years, first in time, but not often first in line. What I offer here is, I'm not just a researcher, I'm not just like a doctor, right? But also someone who fished the rivers with my father, my grandfather, who has been participating in these movements since I was very young, who has had to walk along the banks of the river looking for dead fish over different periods of time in the year, who has had to collect water to bring down to hearings to try to show the state of the river in which we lived, who has prayed to, with, and in the river. I grew up a native scientist, but I was discouraged from participating in science through Western education because there wasn't a space for my tribal knowledge. I remember entering into a very particular debate with one of the leading physical anthropologists at Stanford in my human biology class, where I mentioned that there was mounting evidence that complicates the theory that native peoples migrated via a land bridge. I was told my science was clouded by my political existence. "You are fighting for something," he said to me. "Scientists are not fighters. They are not political." But here we are, working together to make political action happen. And I welcome you, scientists, to the political. Dam removal is at the forefront of some of the biggest environmental and economic development issues that continue to be hard fought in courts, have major impacts on water policy, land use, and development, and Indigenous peoples face some of the harshest consequences of climate change. So when we think about what sovereignty, self-determination, and land return will do, that is how we build actual climate resilience. We are not going to build decolonization with the same Western frameworks. Instead, this is about how we understand centering Indigenous knowledges to build governance that values relationships, connectedness, cultural, social, and spiritual practices. So I want to end here. In 2002, I was standing up the hill on the shores of the Trinity River looking out over it with my grandfather, Milton Baldy. Our communities were still reeling from the recent fish kill, where thousands upon thousands of adult Chinook salmon had died along the shores of the Klamath River. My grandfather, he was a very strong and stolid man, born and raised in the Hoopa Valley Reservation. He spoke Hoopa before he even spoke English. He often would talk about himself as the strongest man in the world, and his favorite story to tell me was about how he was a tree faller. And one time, he was on top of a tree and it started to fall down because they didn't know that he was there, and he ran down the side of the trunk as it fell and jumped like Superman, only to break one single finger, his thumb, which was why it was crooked. He was also a fisherman and a hunter, and he used to tell me stories that most elders have told us growing up about how the rivers used to run silver with salmon, and you could walk along the backs of the fish. But standing with him that day as we looked over the Trinity River, after we had visited the thousands upon thousands of dead relative salmon, he looked at me and his voice cracked. "What do you think this means for our world?" he asked me. "What does this mean for our future generations?" He was mourning, something that I couldn't really quite conceptualize at the time. And the mourning that happened in our tribal communities because of that fish kill, it demonstrated for us this ongoing impact of settler colonial government regulations and policies that don't just threaten the environment, they threaten the health and well-being of our people and our future generation. We know that our futures are suffering and our rivers are suffering because of the continued seizure and diversion of water. We live those impacts every single day. Our communities not only understand sociocultural and health connections to water and environment, we live them. The next step in this process will be how we understand and center relationships with salmon, our more than human relatives in natural world. These types of movements have actually been happening all over the world. In New Zealand, the Wangdani River was declared as possessing all rights and powers, duties and liabilities of a legal person. In Toledo, Ohio, citizens voted to grant legal rights for people to Lake Erie, the first time a natural resource has been granted legal status in the United States. In July of 2019, Bangladesh became the first country to grant all rivers the same legal status of humans. And locally in 2019, the Yurok tribe declared the Klamath River as having personhood and rights that we have a responsibility to uphold, protect, and fight for. Our science is relationships that we solidified in our languages, in our stories, in our theories, and we have to do that again. Our policies, our laws, our resolutions have to say that governance is about relationship and responsibility, because when we decentered that, we not only lost so many salmon relatives, but now our salmon relatives are endangered. So let's talk about our relatives in law, policy, scientific findings, publications, management plans, and throughout Western academia like they matter to us. Like they matter to us. Salmon navigate sometimes hundreds of miles to return home, and they live by their relationship to their homelands. They cross borders fluidly. They build relationships across cultures, across nations, counties, and states. They are representative of what we have to do here to build dam removal. We have built those relationships over many, many years. In Hoopa, we also say that when our first people left, they went into everything, like the rocks, the rivers, the trees, the plants, the salmon. Salmon are our first people. They are much older, much wiser. They have always been here for us. When we pray for them to return, we celebrate them. We are grateful for what they give to us, and we say a prayer in our ceremonies which mean, let the salmon return. So I want us to imagine this world, a world without dams, because we know that it is possible. We are the peoples who can embody what that looks like and what that feels like. And we can think about this as a world that not is just possible, but is necessary. We have to talk about it like it's real, like it's happening. We have to move every single piece we can together so that it will happen. We have to know that no matter how long it takes, we'll keep going. In 2011, the largest dam removal in U.S. history began on the Elwha River in Washington state. 2 dams were taken down in an effort to restore spawning areas for critically endangered salmon. And there was a lot of concerns on the part of scientists and community members about what this would mean for the ecosystem. There was a 100 years of sediment trapped in the watershed. They said, this is the largest dam removal in the nation and certainly the first of its kind, and nobody knows what's going to happen. In many cases, they anticipated many, many years before any of the benefits would be seen from dam removal. Instead, they said there would be many years of destruction as the ecosystem would need to recover. But Indigenous peoples, we're not thinking about just us, this time, this place, but about our future generations. And hearing that it might take a long time for the ecosystem to recover didn't mean that we wanted to stop dam removal. Maybe we won't see the benefit of dam removal in our lifetime, but we're going to do it because we know that we're not just responsible to this place now, we're responsible to this place 150 years from now. Except that recovery from dam removal went much faster than they thought. And the recovery of the ecosystem, they said, was almost immediate. A UC geological survey that looked at more than 200 dam removals found that fish species and habitat would change rapidly. Even when digesting a fairly large sediment pulse, the system settles down substantially after 3 to 5 years. Because that's it. The dam didn't make any sense. It was illogical. It was forcing an ecosystem into something that could not be sustainable, but the ecosystem bounces back because everything is working together so it can heal very quickly. And that's how I imagine decolonization. Because colonization makes no sense. Colonization tries to force us to live in a way that is hard for everyone. And we wonder why we carry all this anxiety, and why we're running out of water, and why there are people without food and housing, and really why it makes no sense. But decolonization, futures without dams, that will help us to recover very quickly. It will build a world that makes sense to us. It will allow us to think about the next steps and the steps after that. I want us all to take a moment to just imagine it. What it would feel like to breathe and remember, and also think that maybe there's a future within our grasp that we can build because of it. At the end of any story we tell in Hoopa, we say, "Hai nantik." That means like, that's it, it's over, it's all done. But it actually means it reaches so far. Because what we say is that any story you've heard, you're going to take with you somewhere. And maybe you'll remember one singular part of it. It'll bring something to you. It'll inspire you. It'll change something you're going to do. It'll reach further than you could ever imagine. I want you to take with you today the part that reminds you that this started with someone saying, we need to take the dams down. And it felt at the time impossible. So when I think about the world of the future, where the national and state parks are returned to Indigenous peoples, where the dams are taken down everywhere, where the salmon are thriving, and where when we make decisions, we think about how does it affect everything. I don't think it's impossible. I don't even think it's just the right thing to do. I think it's the part that's going to be the most fun. And I look forward to how we're all going to do that together. So I'll say at the end, set dia informa alphala, which means I'm happy for this good thing that we have started here together. Thank you.
You're not going to find a panel this impressive in very many venues, so there's a good opportunity. Does anybody have a question that's burning to ask? Dave Muir, I see you have a question.
Funding for all the fish screens that are necessary. Identified, not identified?
The old fish screen question.
Yeah, it's not identified yet. We do have several opportunities with infrastructure funding on the horizon and a lot of state efforts as well. We're having those conversations. We've got a separate funding coordination group and now a separate screening group, and we're trying to figure out the ins and outs, but it takes time, and this is a 5-year blip of funding, and you know we need to go through designs. One of the things that I'm kind of pushing for is combining a lot of those diversions, so the screening effort has to be a lot less than 50 screens in the Keno Reach. So.
Anybody else with a question? I've got a question, and this is for you too, actually. You described all those projects. How does that integrate with the integrated fisheries restoration and monitoring plan? Or is there integration there? Because the RFRMP started before it was really clear at the
Yeah, that's a great question, and there was a little bit of confusion there, but so the IFRMP identifies kind of higher level actions based on, you know, habitat stresses and threats. So for example, in the Scott River, you would get something like add large woody debris to, you know, the specific hydrologic unit. My project kind of looks at, you know, specific areas within this reach. This is exactly where you need to put that wood, or this is exactly where you need to put that. So it takes it down a whole nother level. So it's kind of a cookbook for restoration practitioners. And then the IFRMP, I kind of did a crosswalk with the areas that we were involved in to make sure that our highest priorities were definitely highlighted within that document as well.
Who else has a question? Questions for this group? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious, Bob, if you're getting any resistance on screening diversions in the upper Klamath, or are people generally cooperative?
All right, well, this is the last question for Bob. There's a whole panel up here. So I think the landowners are actually wanting to get some screens on their properties over there because they know that salmon are going to be coming up and they're going to have some potential liabilities. So they have been involved in some of the preliminary conversations, and you know, I haven't done much work with the landowners yet, but a lot of other people have, ODFW and DEQ and the several other folks from Interior, and I think they're welcoming screens on their property to reduce, you know, their liability for potential take.
I'll let you have the rest of the session. I do have a question for Rob Lusardi and Rachel. Really excited that spring Chinook salmon are swimming around the upper basin. We know from genetic evidence that springers used to make it up there and reproduce. Can you talk a little bit about what it takes? So right now we do not have spring Chinook salmon upstream of the Salmon River on the Klamath. What's it going to take to get springers to start recolonizing the upper basin, and what are the efforts around that?
So I think the last speaker did a really good job talking about how when the dams are removed, the fish will figure it out. And so I feel pretty good in that answer. We do expect them to move upstream. I think Mark would probably have some specifics too on kind of reintroduction strategies up there. But the habitat exists up there, right? We have cold water. We have those fantastic headwaters for spring run as well. So I think it will take some time. And you know, what this experimental release has taught us so far is that the system has changed, I think, significantly, particularly with the lake. And so trying to figure that out and look at timing of outmigration and whatnot will be really important. And then we'll watch those fish move back into the system up top. Yeah.
Thank you. The original KBRA, the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement, included partners from the upper basin, the agricultural community. At the present time, it seems as though they are alienated and in some ways trying to regain some credibility and participation in the restoration effort. Many of you are probably more current on that than I. I'm wondering whether the return of the fish above J.C. Boyle in particular, through Keno, through the upper Klamath Lake, can be used with intent to bring those people back into a cooperative and more, I will use the word joyful, because that was the days that the KBRA and the KBRA was signed. Those people were sharing in the joy, at least the partners in the irrigation community, in the federal irrigation community. How can the return of the fish be used to recreate community in what is a very divided community now? That's more than a technical question, if you couldn't tell.
It's a really good question. Chris, Chairman?
I think one of the things that has to happen, that's going to be forced to happen with the re-irrigation of salmon above the dams, is the idea of continual change, specifically in the upper basin communities, the ag community. I feel like there's the sense from tribal communities that if you don't change and adapt to your surrounding and to your environment, you cease to exist. I feel like that same sort of sentiment really needs to be adopted by the ag community, and was at one point really the foundation of the ag community, is looking to change and adapt to the environment around you. Once salmon get there, there will be a force change at some level, and we're hoping that we can really piggyback on the success of the salmon returning to really help change the foundational thought process of the ag community in towards a way that looks at change as a good thing and adapting to their new environment as a good thing. But I think until then, we'll still continue to struggle. No. I have a question. I got a question for Bill, because I think he covered this a little bit, but I wanted to ask him specifically. As we look at returning salmonids back into the upper basin, and we look at continuing to work on fish passage, how important in the future or what role in the future do you think integrating fisheries restoration and fire restoration will be?
Well, I think it's critical that we do both simultaneously, and that's why we put such an effort in early on, you know, believing that dam removal was going to happen. You know, there's going to be times, I mean, we have a changing climate, and so we have to think about the change that's coming, and we have to use fire in a way that breaks up the potential for these large wildfire conflagrations that are you know, just being devastating to entire watersheds. I mean, you look at the McKinney fire, for example, and you look at all of those grasslands along that river corridor. You know, if there was a community of practice in place that was burning, you know, even just 10-acre blocks in a checkerboard pattern through there and just alternating places every year, then there would be no place for fires, spot fires to land in that receptive fuel if you did it the right time of year. You can burn those grasses off in late June when the nighttime humidity recovers come up to 70 to 90% and go out, and you don't even need fire lines. And so, but you need a lot of people in a lot of places doing this all at the same time. You know, fire, you know, builds and you know, subsides in 4 distinct separate stages, and if your entire landscape is building at the same time, it's, you know, you're gonna see things like we've seen with the McKinney fire and the Camp Fire and all of these others, the Slater fire, where spot fires are igniting thousands of fires 2 miles at a time that are just all burning at once, and you just can't survive. Nothing can survive that. And then, you know, you follow that up with, you know, monsoonal moisture and rains and the sediment inputs and all these other things that create these, you know, press disturbances that just constantly impact those fish. You know, we could end up losing those fish anyway. And so we have to address both sides.
Follow-up question. How angry or frustrating do you get when we have you know, conferences like this or summits like this or conversations like this about salmon, you know, passage, whether it's passage or reintroduction, and the plans that come out, the new plans for the next 10 years that don't include a fire regime as a part of the restoration plan? How frustrating is that for you as a fire restorationist?
But it's really not that frustrating because we've built different conversations to get there. And so, you know, we've got, you know, the things that are being achieved in this group of people right here are being achieved in a separate group of people. We were at Gridlock in 2007 on upslope management, and so we split out our second attempt at creating collaborative processes to achieve both of these things into upstream and upslope and instream working groups. And those are now coming together in organizational capacities like the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership. I believe there are 9 large landscape collaboratives throughout California at this point, and even more when you look at throughout the West. And so the movement's growing, and you know, it's just a matter of continuing or getting to the point of bringing those two things back together in the conversation.
So do you want to, is there any other big question before I would let the panel go and talk about? Yes. I'm tethered, I can't bring it to you. Great to see you.
My question's for Bob. You know, what's the strategic plan for when the dams do come down? What's in place to make sure that invasive predatory fish that isn't going to enter the Trinity River or affect lower basin Klamath? Yeah, we didn't necessarily address that in the restoration plan. We know that, you know, there's definitely some kind of potential threat for that. I think the KRC kind of took a look at that, and Camus, you know, as to kind of how to deal with some of those invasives through dam removal. But kind of indirectly, you know, focusing on those cold water areas, we know that, you know, the bass aren't necessarily going to be issues in those areas, and protecting those areas and kind of highlighting those, I think, could potentially get around that. But does anyone else want to take a stab at that question?
I think it's important to realize that the fish in Iron Gate and Copco, those predatory fish, which include perch and bass primarily, have had unfettered access to the lower Klamath for decades. So the fact that they're going to be put into the Klamath after drawdown is no different than the connection that they've had. There's not been widespread establishment of bass or perch in the 100 years of the dam existence right now. So the effects analysis reached the conclusion that there wouldn't be permanent and successful establishment of those fish below the river, especially in its newly restored condition that will result from dam removal.
Okay, well, we're gonna let you guys off for lunch. I do want, yeah, 5 minutes, wait, wait. All right, Troy, one more question.
I heard you guys talk about you took some spring salmon and did your studies up on the upper river. I'm 56 years old. I lived in the Happy Camper area all my life. And I used to fish for spring salmon growing up in high school in the 80s. And I gave it up in 1984. I caught one spring salmon July 5th in 94 at the mouth of Indian Creek. I've lived on Indian Creek and up and down the creeks all my time. I have not seen a spring salmon since 2000 in Indian Creek. We did a study last year. We only, the count on the Salmon River was only 94. This year was 200. Can you tell me how many salmon have gone past Happy Camp to the dam? So what I'm trying to get at is, how are you going to take that spring salmon if they have never gone past Happy Camp in 10 years? That's, to me, I want to know how you can do it. I'm hoping, praying that the Creator is going to make a way for it. But I just want to see how our science and your science is going to make sure that that salmon gets there, because I'm saying I haven't seen a salmon since 94 in the Happy Camp area. I have not heard any spring salmon hit in the fish hatchery in the last 10 years, unless it's all secret. I just want to know how you guys are going to put spring salmon in that stretch.
So I think it's, you know, with some of the earlier conversations too about time and kind of where we're at and how long people have been managing and diverting the river is a very short time. Salmon had been around, particularly spring around, an extremely long time. They've dealt with things a lot more difficult than this: glaciers, earthquakes, and they're really good at finding and accessing habitat. That doesn't mean it will be immediate, but I do think when the habitat is there that those fish will find a way to make it upstream, certainly to higher up in the basin on the main stem Klamath, through either straying from the Salmon River population, or there's a lot of potential mechanisms of how that could happen. But my general feeling on it is when the river comes back and you have more of a natural flow regime and you have the habitat to support those fish, that they can and they will do it. That's my general kind of take on it, yeah.
Well, I think the other thing too is when we started this study, I was working with Mark, and he actually took me on a tour of Link, Keno, and JC Boyle, because I had never seen him before. And I had said to him, I'm like, there is no way that the fish that we're gonna release are ever gonna make it past Link River Dam. And I remember when we did our first download, I was like, oh my God, we got detections. And there's really nothing at Link that would support them to get over. And as we did more downloads, I was like, there's still fish showing up. There's still fish making it over this dam. And I think that there's some resilience to these fish. You know, I think the last speaker did a great job in saying, like, the system knows what it wants to be, right? And we put these dams in place in a really unnatural way, and hopefully taking them down, we're supporting these populations that have evolved to be there. These salmon are supposed to be there. And I know just from my data, I was like, I feel like some of my salmon did what I thought was the impossible. And even though it was a small chunk, I was like, this small chunk still did it, which was more than the number I was thinking. I thought at link, I was like, I'm not gonna get any detections. I'm gonna lose them all in the lake, and everyone's gonna ask me what happened. And sure enough, within 3 weeks of releasing them, we had salmon that were approaching Link River Dam, which I thought was amazing because I haven't been in the upper basin in over 100 years. And I think that was one of the biggest questions people kept asking me was, what are they gonna do when we release them? I was like, you know what, I don't know, that's a great question because we know so much about red band in that area. And it was cool to see that the salmon had, at least some of them had done what I was hoping they would do, which is to approach the dam and some of them making it over that dam.
This is not a question. This is just to let you guys know, everybody here on this panel, I appreciate all your, all that you guys done in the last 20 years to have these dams come down. And I'm honestly gonna sit here and tell you guys, the day we see that excavator on top of that dam, I want you guys to come all up here and join me and have a celebration back here that day. I would love to see every one of your faces here celebrate when that first rock comes off that dam. Thank you guys very much.
I think one thing I want to add too is that we as Indigenous peoples have a role in this that we've been in consideration of for a very long time. We're supposed to be doing salmon ceremonies. We're supposed to be going into these spaces and welcoming the salmon home every year. And I think we were separated from that because of colonization and dams and all of the things that have boarding schools, all the things that have separated us from that. Our methodologies weren't just, let's build the right habitat, which we were doing, by the way. A lot of Indigenous fishery sciences, you need to create the spaces that actually help the salmon to feel comfortable in the areas that they're in. I remember watching a video, it was like Planet Earth or something that was on Disney Channel, and they were like, yeah, random branches would fall over the river and create the perfect area for the fish to stop and spawn. And I would be like, you think random branches every year would be like, I should fall on the river now because the salmon are coming? Like, no, like we were creating these spaces and habitats to invite them home. But I think we were also singing for them and dancing for them and being there with them. And I think we will be recreating that as well. And I think you'll notice that the salmon, they talk about epigenetic memory. And one thing that I found really interesting about fisheries science was the studies that were done on salmon that were grown in hatcheries and how they have a difficult time thriving in the natural habitats. And after a while, they started to really study these salmon and they figured out that they didn't have the epigenetic memory that comes from being a salmon, that is born of the space that you are from and returning home. And I think that we were contributing partners in that epigenetic memory through our songs and our language and our cultures. And when we do that we're gonna watch as our salmon people, they are welcomed to where they are from. And I think that that's not, to me, out of the ordinary of what any scientist should feel like they're also doing for the salmon. It's not, let's throw them in and see what happens. It's how do we help to recreate that relationship to bring them back to the places that they are from. And I think of it much like Indigenous peoples. If you gave us land back and be like, I don't know if you guys know what you're gonna do there, will you even understand? Oh yeah, we'll know how to be there and what to do and how to manage it. We're gonna be fine. I think the salmon too will be like, don't worry. I've been waiting to get back to my home for a very long time. And their memory, their epigenetic memory will carry them home.